LoveLore Library. Chapter 535. Enchanting smiled and said, "Madam may not know, but there is a legend in the Murong family that there is a mysterious master, the #1 master in the world 50 years ago, Murong Xiong." Yili did not hide her confusion. She did not even know much about the masters of the present age, let alone the #1 master 50 years ago. Mo Xiaoyao clearly knew something about this person and was very interested. Murong Xiong is still alive. Enchanting's eyes flashed with a trace of deep thought. She looked at Mo Xiaoyao and said, "That is the rumor, but no one has seen him." This martial arts convention was convened in the name of Murong Xiong. It is said that the martial arts in Jianghu are in decline. Senior Murong wants to see the younger masters of the world, maybe he wants to accept a disciple. On the other hand, Enchanting looked at the two with a smile and said, "The only descendant of the Murong family, the second miss of the Murong family, is 17 years old. It is said that Senior Murong wants to find a reliable husband for his family's younger generation." Young Master Ren is really well informed. Mo Xiaoyao heard the news he wanted and his attitude immediately returned to its previous indifference. Enchanting also knew that she had said too much. She smiled faintly and did not say anything. "Why are they here?" Yili glanced at the crowd on the street below and frowned. Mo Xiaoyao raised his head and looked down. There were a few familiar faces in the crowd. Mo Jingli, Lei Tingfeng, and most importantly, Su Qingchen. Enchanting naturally saw a few outstanding people in the crowd. She raised her eyebrows and said, "Madam knows them." Yili shook her head and said, "I can't say I know them. I have met young Master Qingchen a few times. There is also Genom of Guozhouzian, I have seen him in Nanzhao. Young Master Ren doesn't know them." These people were definitely the most famous young talents in the world. It would be too fake to say that she did not know them. Enchanting smiled and said, "This one has seen young Master Lei and Prince Li a few times, but this is the first time I have seen young Master Qingchen. He is indeed an extremely elegant person." It was no wonder he saw them here. They had all attended Princess Anqi's wedding and coronation ceremony in Nanzhao. They must have come directly to the martial arts circle assembly. It was just that. Prince Ding and Princess Consort had returned to the northwest in advance. Would they come? If Prince Ding also comes, then this year's Martial Arts Society assembly will be really lively. Young Master Qingchen is not a martial artist, Yili said. Enchanting smiled and said, "This is not a serious martial arts assembly. With young Master Qingchen's reputation, even if he has no strength to truss a chicken, he is still much stronger than ordinary masters. But I'm afraid that young Master Qingchen may not fancy the young lady of the Murong family." Yili agreed with Enchanting's comment in her heart. Not to mention Su Qingchen, eldest uncle and eldest aunt would probably not agree to this marriage. Although the Su family was not an arrogant family, the gap between a merchant family and a scholarly family was more important than the so-called gap between the rich and the poor in the eyes of the Su family. The Su family would rather marry a girl from a poor scholar's family than marry a merchant's daughter. If the merchant's family was kind and charitable, then so be it. However, the Murong family was so rich that they could rival a country. It could be said that they monopolized half of Shiling's commerce. Thus, the Su family did not fancy them at all. Therefore, the Su family's choice of daughter-in-law was, to some extent, stricter than the emperor's choice of concubine. The emperor needed the merchant's money, so the merchant's daughter could enter the palace as a concubine. However, the Su family did not need it, so they did not need to marry a merchant's daughter. Although she had been anxious about her brother's marriage, Yili really did not have any thoughts about it this time. Late at night, Su Qingchen sat alone in the side room of the inn and drank tea. Although he had also received an invitation from the Murong family, Su Qingchen did not stay in the courtyard prepared by the Murong family like Mo Jingli and Lei Dingfeng. Instead, he found a good inn in an city to stay. A slight sound came from the window. Mo Xiuyao turned his head to look at the window and said with a smile, "You are indeed here." Yili and Mo Xiuyao stood in front of the window and looked at Su Qingchen, who seemed to have been waiting for them to come. They smiled and said, "Big brother, you have worked hard these days." Su Qingchen casually drank tea and said with a faint smile, "Li knows that big brother has worked hard." When she was running away with the prince, she was very straightforward. Yili looked apologetically at Su Qingchen. She had nothing to say. Mo Xiuyao could not bear for his beloved wife to be wronged. He pulled Yili over to sit across from Su Qingchen and said, "The matter of Nanzhao is not difficult for you. Besides, if we were here, it would be more inconvenient for you to deal with it." Su Qingchen smiled faintly and picked up the teapot to pour a cup of tea for Yili and Mo Xiuyao. Yili let out a sigh of relief. Big brother was not angry. Su Qingchen looked at Mo Xiuyao with a faint smile and said, "Speaking of which, Prince really has trouble coming to him wherever he goes. Isn't this a sightseeing trip? How did you come to the martial arts convention? And this seems to be Miss Murong's matchmaking convention. Is it really okay for you to bring Li Her here?" Mo Xiuyao gritted his teeth. He wanted to slap Su Qingchen to death. Would it kill you not to drive a wedge between them? But Yili was right in front of him, so he could only smile appropriately and look at Su Qingchen kindly. "Brother Qingchen, please don't think too much. Miss Li and I are just a normal couple who came to join in the fun. But Brother Qingchen, I heard that Miss Murong's looks are not ordinary. Brother Qingchen is not young anymore and should consider marriage. After all, when you are old, people will dislike you. Most importantly, Miss Murong's dowry is generous. Brother Qingchen, why don't you marry her and make a contribution to the Northwest's economy?" Su Qingchen's expression was calm as he said calmly, "This one seems to have heard that I don't like women. I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint Prince." Yili felt helpless. These two people could never coexist peacefully when they were together. Should she be glad that her big brother did not know martial arts and Mo Xiuyao did not have the habit of attacking people who did not know martial arts? Otherwise, these two people would not just be mocking each other. She was afraid that they would start fighting as soon as they met. "Big brother, why did you come to join in the fun?" Yili calmly changed the topic. Su Qingchen looked at her with a faint smile and said, "Prince Lianair Genim of Gojoseon warmly invited me. I couldn't refuse, so I came." Yili blinked, her eyes filled with disbelief. Would there be something that young Master Qingchen could not refuse? If he was not willing, even if you were 10 times or 100 times more enthusiastic, he could still push you away in the blink of an eye. "Big brother, is there a problem with this martial arts convention?" Yili asked with a frown. Su Qingchen looked at Mo Xiuyao and said, "Prince, what do you know about Murong family's mysterious expert?" Mo Xiuyao pondered for a moment and said, "It can't be considered mysterious. Murong Xiong is the only person in Murong family who did not do business but practiced martial arts. It is said that he did not like doing business since he was young, so he was not valued by Murong family. I know that when he was 18, he made a name for himself in Jianghu. When he was 20, there was a famous sect in Jianghu that caused trouble for Murong family. The family of the Emperor of Xiling also had the intention of looting a burning house. Murong Xiong single-handedly massacred the entire family that was looking for trouble overnight. Not a single person was left alive. Because he was too vicious and merciless, his reputation in Jianghu was not good. From time to time, there were various forces that came to Murong family to provoke them, but they were all defeated by Murong Xiong. When Murong Xiong was 30 years old, he won the title of the world's #1 expert. After that, he was invincible for 3 consecutive sessions until he suddenly disappeared a year before the 4th martial arts convention. After that, no one in Jianghu saw him again. Many people said that he was already dead, but those who went to provoke Murong family also died very ugly deaths. Among them were 2 of the 4 experts after Murong Xiong, so, in these years, very few people in Jianghu dared to go to Murong family to cause trouble. So, is it really Murong Xiong this time? Chapter 536. Su Qingchen nodded and took out a glittering golden invitation, placing it in front of the 2. Murong Xiong's name was written on the invitation. Mo Xiuyao took the invitation and looked at it for a long time. He frowned and said, Murong Xiong is the uncle of the current Murong family's head. He should be at least 80 years old. What is he trying to do by jumping out at this time? Who knows? Maybe it's just as everyone guessed. He wants to find a suitable husband for Miss Murong so that the Murong family doesn't have a successor. Su Qingchen didn't care much about this. If it weren't for the fact that Mo Jing, Li Lei, and Ting Feng were all here, and even Chu Jing was interested, Su Qingchen wouldn't have made this trip. Although the Su family and the Prince Ding mansion didn't care about the Murong family's property, if such a large amount of property was given to someone who shouldn't have it, it would be troublesome. Mo Xiuyao coldly snorted, and a mocking smile appeared on his lips. Gathering all the heroes in the world for him to choose from. Murong Xiong thinks too highly of the Murong family. Su Qingchen smiled faintly. But there are still many people rushing like a flock of ducks. From the Su family's point of view, this kind of arrogant behavior was inferior. Naturally, they wouldn't put them in their eyes. Mo Xiuyao nodded. He looked at Su Qingchen and said sincerely, like before, I'll have to trouble Big Brother again. Su Qingchen was speechless. He could see. When Mo Xiuyao had something to ask of him, he was the big brother. When there was nothing to do, he was Brother Qingchen, Young Master Qingchen, or Young Master Su. You're not going to participate? Su Qingchen asked. Mo Xiuyao smiled. If it's just a simple martial arts convention, I might be able to exchange a few blows with Ling Taihan. I don't think Ling Taihan will participate in this kind of thing, so I don't have to show up. When the day comes, I'll go with Miss Li to join in the fun. You can do everything as you see fit. Do you think I'm worried about Big Brother? If eldest young Master Su really wanted to do something, he would definitely be so considerate that others would feel ashamed of their own inferiority. Since Su Qingchen had come along, it meant that he had taken this matter to heart. Naturally, Mo Xiuyao was happy to let it go. Su Qingchen looked at Mo Xiuyao, who spoke calmly without any reluctance. In the end, she nodded. No matter how shamelessly Mo Xiuyao tried to shirk responsibility, at least he was absolutely serious and sincere towards Li. Not just anyone could resist the temptation of the Murong family's property. It should be known that even the national treasuries of various countries may not have as much money as the Murong family's property. What did it mean to be as rich as a country? The Murong family is the one with real wealth that can rival a country. Mo Xiuyao was willing to reject the opportunity to join the Murong family for Li. Based on this point alone, Su Qingchen was willing to settle this matter for him. After chatting with Su Qingchen for a while, Mo Xiuyao finally pulled Yili to leave after seeing that the sky was already dark. Before leaving, he said, "We'll be staying at the Qingyuan Inn in the city. If there's anything, just send someone to find me." Su Qingchen nodded and sent them out. At this time, in a secluded room in the backyard of the Qingyuan Inn, Ren Qining stood in front of the window with his hands behind his back and looked at the scenery outside. This was an independent courtyard. There were only 3 such courtyards in the entire Qingyuan Inn, and they were much better and more expensive than the heavenly rooms. When Mo Xiaoyao and Yili could only stay in the earth room, Ren Qining was able to stay in this kind of courtyard. It could be seen that it was very extraordinary. You lost them. Ren Qining turned around and looked at the middle-aged man standing at the door. His face no longer had its original cultured and refined appearance. His handsome face was dyed with coldness and displeasure. The middle-aged man at the door couldn't help but tremble. He said in a trembling voice, "Young master, please forgive us. That Yi and Madame Ye's skills are very inferior. Our people just followed them for a while and then they disappeared." Ren Qining's brows were tightly knitted, but he didn't blame him. After all, even he couldn't see the depth of that young man's martial arts. It was natural that his people couldn't follow him. "Have you found out their identities?" The middle-aged man's face paled. These two people seemed to have suddenly appeared in that small town. This subordinate is incompetent and couldn't find out where they came from. I also couldn't find out their identities. Trash. Wait, their surname is Yi. Ren Qining said thoughtfully. The middle-aged man carefully asked, "Young master, have you thought of something?" Ren Qining said in a low voice, "I remember that Prince Ding's princess consort is also surnamed Yi. In this world, there weren't many people who had that kind of martial arts at this age, so he couldn't help but be suspicious." The middle-aged man hesitated and said, "Prince Ding has a head of white hair, and these two people's appearance seems to be slightly different from the Prince Ding and Princess Ding we got. Also, this subordinate received news that Prince Ding and Princess Ding have indeed reneged on their promise to go to Glass City." Ren Qining's eyes flashed with a trace of disappointment. That man and woman really weren't Prince Ding and his wife. Then when did such a couple appear in the martial arts world? Most importantly, why did they appear at this time? Go and investigate again. We must find out their identities before the martial arts convention. Ren Qining said. This subordinate obeys. Chapter 537. With Su Qingchen keeping an eye on An City and the Murong family situation, Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao were even more relaxed. Every day, Mo Xiaoyao would drag Yi Li to wander around the city, aimlessly as if they were a couple who were bored to pass the time before the martial arts convention. This made the people who were sent to follow them extremely depressed. They couldn't see anything wrong with this young couple. Even though the man was a little more handsome, and his martial arts were a little higher, and the woman was a little more beautiful, and seemed to be more outstanding than the average noble lady, it had nothing to do with their master at all. They couldn't understand why their master was so insistent that these two people were dangerous. After following them for 2 days, they still couldn't find anything wrong with these two people. Even Ren Qining was embarrassed to send people to follow them. He could only withdraw the people who were following Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li. When they left the room, Yi Li was surprised to find that there was no one following them. They left so quickly. Mo Xiaoyao said lightly, "He's a smart person. Since he can't find out who we are, it won't look good for anyone if he continues to follow us." Yi Li frowned and said, "Big brother, do you have any information on Ren Qining's background?" Mo Xiaoyao shook his head and said, "I can't find anything. This person and the power behind him shouldn't have appeared in Jianghu or among the nobles of various countries. Otherwise, there should be some clues. But it's okay, this is Shiling's territory. This person appeared in Xiling. Even if there was a headache, it should be Lei Jinting. Your big brother has already sent people to remind Lei Jinting and Lei Dingfeng. Let's see their reaction first." Yi Li nodded. If Ren Qining didn't think he was smart and sent people to follow them, Yi Li wouldn't have had any interest in this person. Since Mo Xiaoyao knew what was going on, Yi Li couldn't be bothered to care. In the past few days, they had been wandering around in and out of An City. Although there was an annoying tail following behind them, they still learned a lot of news. Although the Murong family was not well known in the northwest and Dechu state, and city was less than 10 miles away from the Murong family. It could be said that the entire An city was within the Murong family's sphere of influence. Naturally, there was no need to talk about the Murong family. It was said that Miss Murong was as beautiful as a flower, and her temperament was gentle and kind. His reputation in An city was extremely good. In the hearts of many people, he was like a living bodhisattva. It was said that on the first day of every month, Miss Murong would go to Zhaoning Temple outside the city to burn incense and pray for her grandfather. Coincidentally, it was the first day of the first lunar month. Even if the martial arts tournament was about to begin, it did not seem to have caused the Murong clan lady to change her habit. Hence, there were very few martial artists who received the news early on. The nobles and heroes did not even have time to eat breakfast before they all rushed to Zhaoning Temple. It made An city, which had been crowded and bustling for the past few days, much quieter. Since Mo Xiaoyao and Yili had come to join in on the fun, they naturally could not avoid going to Zhaoning Temple to join in on the grand occasion. After the two of them finished their breakfast, they leisurely made their way out of the city. When they arrived at Zhaoning Temple, they saw that it was filled with people. If outsiders who were unaware of the situation were to see this, they would definitely marvel at the flourishing incense in Zhaoning Temple. Although there were too many people, fortunately, Zhaoning Temple itself was still a place worth visiting. Especially the secluded mountain behind the temple, the scenery was picturesque. The people who had come all crowded in front of the temple, wanting to see Miss Murong's beautiful face. At this time, the back of the temple was especially quiet and free. Mo Xiaoyao and Yili held hands as they strolled along the small path in the back of the temple. The faint noise from the distance made the back of the temple seem even more deserted. Thinking of the people who were eagerly waiting, Yili could not help but chuckle softly. Mo Xiaoyao lowered his head to look at her. What is Miss Li laughing about? Yili raised her head to look at his expression. She held back her laughter and said, I'm wondering if Mo Jingli and Lei Tingfeng are among those people. Also, if Prince is also waiting with those people, what would happen? Mo Xiaoyao gave a displeased snort. Master Prince Ding had been arrogant his entire life. It had always been others who were eagerly waiting for him. When had he ever waited for others? Other than Miss Li, who else in this world is worth waiting for? Yili helplessly rolled her eyes. She felt somewhat immune to Prince Mo's sweet words. As they chatted, Mo Xiaoyao's gaze focused. He raised his head to look ahead. Then he picked up Yili's doppelganger and walked up the small path to land on an old tree covered in green vines. Mo Xiaoyao's actions did not shock Yili. She leaned in Mo Xiaoyao's arms and looked in the direction he was looking. A while later, she heard the clear sounds of conversation. A group of people slowly walked down the mountain. Yili looked around. There were more than 10 strong men and women holding swords and sabers. They were protecting a young girl in a light purple robe. Beside her were 6 young girls in green robes dressed as maids and 2 mamas. With a glance, Yili could see that the purple robe the young girl wore was the water cloud satin, the head of the 3 treasures of Nanzhao. The gauze covering the robe was hibiscus muslin. The people of Nanzhao considered blue and white to be the noblest. Therefore, the water cloud satin of the 3 treasures of Nanzhao was more simple in color and did not produce dark purple. Thus, this water cloud satin was not a tribute from Nanzhao. Other than Nanzhao, no one else in the world could make such high-quality satin as the water cloud satin. Therefore, this purple water cloud satin could only be made by themselves. In other words, someone had long grasped the most precious secret of Nanzhao. Once they produced large amounts of water cloud satin, it would be a great fortune. But the world had never heard of any place outside of Nanzhao that had water cloud satin. Then it was likely that they did not care about this business. Looking at the young girl's jade hairpins, pearls and gems, they were all of the highest quality. Her attire was something that even an imperial princess would not have, much less a commoner. Without even thinking about it, Yili had already guessed who the girl who was being protected in the middle of the crowd was. "Miss, there are many people outside the mountain gates. Let's go out the side door," the mamas beside the young girl in purple suggested softly. While there were not many people here, that was because those people thought that Miss had not come yet. They did not know that they had already gone up the mountain before dawn. If they went out the main door now, they would probably disturb Mississippi. The young girl in purple smiled faintly and said, "Mama Sue, don't worry. Those people are all heroes of the world who came to participate in the martial arts convention. Presumably, they would not be so ignorant of the rules." "That's right. Miss is right. Those people can't wait to curry favor with Mississippi. Who would dare to offend Miss?" The maid beside the young girl in purple smiled and said, "Family head and granduncle said that they would choose the most outstanding man in the world to be Miss's husband. They also want to let those people know that our Miss is not only the Miss of the richest family, but also a great beauty capable of causing the downfall of a city." "What nonsense are you saying? Be careful that Grandpa will discipline you when we go back," the young girl in purple reprimanded. The pair of watery eyes that were exposed outside the light purple veil carried a faint smile. Clearly, she did not have any intention of blaming. The maid knew that her Miss was always kind and was not afraid. She giggled and said, "Miss is the kindest. She would not let Master punish Lou, The young girl in purple sighed softly and said, "Forget it. Quickly go back so that Grandpa and Granduncle won't worry." Chapter 538. Miss is right. The group of people chatted as they walked further and further away. Only then did Mo Xiaoyao hug Yili and land on the small path again. Yili looked at the small path that had already disappeared and thought for a while. She smiled and said, "It seems that our luck isn't bad. We didn't have to squeeze with those people and we were able to see Miss Mu Rong first." Mo Xiaoyao gave an indifferent humph. It was clear that he didn't care. Yili helplessly poked him and said, "I don't believe that you didn't see it, Prince." Mo Xiaoyao lowered his head to look at her and said with a smile, "See what?" Yili said, "That Miss Mu Rong, the dark patterns on her clothes and the hairpin on her head are all phoenix patterns. It seems that Miss Mu Rong really likes phoenixes." In Xiling and Dechu State, where the culture and customs were similar, not everyone could use phoenix patterns. With Yili's status, no one could control what patterns she liked to use. However, when she was still in the Chu capital, Yili herself rarely used phoenix patterns. Especially the dark patterns on Miss Mu Rong's clothes. It didn't look conspicuous, but it couldn't escape Yili and Mo Xiaoyao's eyes. That was the nine-tailed phoenix pattern, the true totem of the king of birds. Just based on this point, it was enough to prove that the Mu Rong family and Miss Mu Rong's thoughts were not normal. Playing to the gallery, Miss Li doesn't need to care about what they do. Mo Xiaoyao silently said. He held Yili's waist with one hand and continued to lead her to the top of the mountain. The scenery behind Zhaoning Temple was beautiful. There were often tourists who came to burn incense and play on the mountain. Therefore, the temple specially built a pavilion on the top of the mountain for people to rest. When the two of them reached the top of the mountain, they saw that there were already people in the pavilion. Ling Taihan was chatting with Lang Luyue and sickly scholar in the pavilion when he heard footsteps. He turned around and was surprised to see Mo Xiaoyao and Yili. He paused for a moment before saying, "Prince Ding. Princess Ding." Mo Xiaoyao and Yili were originally just in disguise, so those who had never seen them before would have a hard time connecting them to each other. However, those who knew them would definitely recognize them. Mo Xiaoyao didn't avoid them either. He helped Yili up the last step and smiled at the three of them. Pavilion Master Ling. It is a pleasure to meet you. Ling Taihan was in a good mood when he saw Mo Xiaoyao's expression. He laughed loudly and said, "It is indeed a pleasure to meet you. I originally thought that Prince Ding wouldn't be able to come this year. He didn't expect to meet her here. How is it? Will Prince be able to fulfill the promise of a martial arts competition that he owed a few years ago?" Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows and smiled at Ling Taihan. "Pavilion Master really wants to fight with I at this time. When the time comes for the martial arts competition. Just now, I saw that Lady Murong was a heavenly beauty. Is Pavilion Master not moved in the slightest? If the two of them were to fight with all their might and still be able to participate in the martial arts competition, then it would only mean that the two of them were just being perfunctory." Ling Taihan sneered. His eyes flashed with contempt as he said indifferently, "She's just a little girl who thinks she's smart. This Pavilion Master didn't come for the Murong family." Although Ling Taihan was the head of the assassins, his personality was steady and resolute. He rarely expressed his dissatisfaction in front of others. It was unknown what Lady Murong had done to provoke him. "I originally wanted to find Enchanting, but since I met you here, Enchanting doesn't count for much. How about it? Prince Ding, can you teach me a thing or two?" Ling Taihan said openly. Although he wanted to find trouble with Enchanting could go at any time, but this Mo Xiaoyao wasn't someone who could fight with him at any time. In the past few years, Ling Taihan had faintly felt that his cultivation had stagnated. It was obvious that he had reached a bottleneck. If he could fight with an expert like Mo Xiaoyao, perhaps he would be able to comprehend something and advance to the next level. Mo Xiaoyao lowered his head to look at Yili. Yili smiled faintly and patted his arm before letting him go. She retreated a few steps back into the pavilion. Ling Taihan walked out first. Mo Xiaoyao said with a smile, "Since it's like this, I also have the chance to experience Pavilion Master Ling's skills." In the gazebo, Yili only nodded at Lang Luyue and Sickly Scholar. The three of them were staring at the two people outside the gazebo. At this moment, they did not have the time to greet and chat. Ling Taihan was dressed in blue. Compared to a few years ago, his bearing was even more steady and grand. In terms of age, Ling Taihan was already over 40 years old. However, his profound inner strength made him look like a 30-year-old man. A cold light flashed and an ancient long sword fell into Ling Taihan's hand. On the mountain peak, the blue-clothed man stood with his sword. He was like Mount Tai. His aura was majestic and it was very eye-catching. Mo Xiaoyao was also dressed in ordinary white. His black hair was like clouds and there was a faint smile on his lips. It was clear that he was in a good mood to fight with Ling Taihan. His eyes flashed and a snowy light flashed in front of him. Mo Xiaoyao's hand was a bright and cold soft sword. Different from Ling Taihan's ancient bronze heavy sword, Mo Xiaoyao's soft sword was as thin as a cicada's wing. With a flick of his wrist, the blade trembled in the air. Neither of the two made the first move. They just stood there and stared at each other. Her clothes and hair fluttered around her even though there was no wind. The three people in the pavilion all held their breaths and stared at the two people standing there. The two of them could vaguely feel the pressure from the energy that was gradually forming around them. After an unknown amount of time, the two suddenly rose from the ground at the same time and turned into countless shadows that flashed through the air. Yili could not help but widen her eyes to see the process of the two fighting. But all she could see were blue and white shadows. Yili knew that it was not that they had really turned into shadows, but that their speed was simply too fast. With her eyesight in the palace, she could not see their movements clearly. At this moment, Yili understood one thing. With her abilities, she might be able to deal with normal experts. But if she really faced top experts like Mo Xiaoyao and Ling Taihan, it was far from enough. Her heart hurt slightly. Yili could not help but frown. A hand was placed on her shoulder. Yili reflexively wanted to fight back. But she heard Lang Liuyue's faint voice. "Don't force yourself." Yili turned her head and looked over. Lang Luyue and Sickly Scholar were no longer staring at the two people fighting. Instead, she glanced at him from time to time. Lang Luyue was fine, but Sickly Scholar's face, which had recovered a lot after recuperating for a few years, had turned pale again. Lang Luyue looked at her and explained seriously. "When true top experts fight, there is too much difference between us. There is no benefit in watching. There is also the possibility of cultivation deviation. In the past, Mo Xiaoyao and Genom of Gojoseon had fought before. But that was not considered to be true. Both sides had held back. But this time, Ling Taihan and Mo Xiaoyao both used their strongest powers to face their opponents. Under their full strength, the qi and battle intent formed between the two of them was enough to cause people with shallow cultivation or unstable temperament to suffer from internal injuries. Yili's temperament could be considered to be one of the top 10 in the world, but her inner strength cultivation had started too late. At most, she could only be compared to Sickly Scholar. Even compared to Lang Luyue, she was still lacking by quite a bit. Just now, she had focused all her energy on watching Mo Xiaoyao and Ling Taihan's moves. If Lang Luyue had not stopped her, she would have suffered internal injuries. Yili naturally thanked Lang Luyue for her good intentions. She glanced at the two people fighting and sighed softly in her heart. Seeing Mo Xiaoyao and Ling Taihan's level of cultivation, it was not that she was not envious. It was just that they had started too late. And practicing martial arts, especially internal energy, had to be practiced from a young age. In novels, people who had obtained miraculous pills and strange secret manuals to become experts were still stories. Lang Luyue seemed to have a good impression of Yili. Seeing her frown, she said softly, "There is no harm in watching. Just don't force it. Prince Ding and Big Brother know their limits. They will not really injure each other." Yili nodded and said, "Thank you, Pavilion Master Lang." She just looked outside helplessly. If she forced it, she could roughly see, but if she did not force it, she really could not see anything clearly. After thinking for a while, Yili stopped looking outside. Instead, she closed her eyes and listened carefully to the movements outside. Lang Luyue saw this and her cold eyes changed to a faint trace of admiration. Chapter 539. In the fight, the two swords would occasionally collide, creating dazzling sparks. But the three people sitting in the pavilion strangely did not hear any sounds of weapons colliding. Yili leaned against the pillar of the pavilion, her eyes slightly closed as she seriously felt the energy flow in the air. She finally found that undetectable but unparalleled energy vibration. That was the vibration caused by the internal power of the two people when they fought. This fight lasted for 4 whole hours. However, even though none of the 3 spectators were able to see a single move clearly, they didn't show the slightest bit of impatience. Yili suddenly felt a sharp charge in the air towards her brain. She hurriedly opened her eyes. She saw the 2 figures, one blue and one white, retreat to the sides. "Big Brother!" Lang Luyue exclaimed softly. She leapt out and reached out to protect Ling Taihan, who was on the verge of collapse. Ling Taihan released Lang Liuyue's hand and waved his hand to indicate that she did not need to worry. Then he turned to look at Mo Xiaoyao and said with a smile, "Prince Ding really is a genius. This seat admires you." Although Mo Xiaoyao was still standing ramrod straight, his expression wasn't any better than Ling Taihan's. It was just that both of their eyes were filled with carefree joy. He smiled and said, "Pavilion Master Ling's literary skills are exquisite. This king also admires it. I have benefited greatly from today's fight." Many thanks, Pavilion Master Ling. Ling Taihan laughed brightly and said, we do not need to say such pleasantries. This seat has not come in vain to be able to fight Prince Ding. This seat will leave first and will not disturb Prince Ding and Wang Fei. Pavilion Master Ling, take care, Yili said softly as she walked out of the pavilion. She walked to Mo Xiaoyao's side to look at him. He had used too much energy and his internal power had been greatly exhausted. He also had some internal injuries that were not serious. In this kind of evenly matched expert-level competition, it was considered light. He let out a sigh of relief. After watching Ling Taihan and the other two descend the mountain, Yili helped Mo Xiaoyao into the pavilion and asked, how are your injuries? Can we go down the mountain now? Mo Xiaoyao smiled bitterly and helplessly. I've been neglecting my cultivation for the past few years. My injuries seem to be more serious than Pavilion Master Ling's. In terms of cultivation, Mo Xiaoyao was indeed inferior to Ling Taihan. Not to mention the fact that there were so many military and civil affairs in the northwest that he had to deal with personally, just his identity as Prince Ding meant that he could not spend a lot of time on martial arts cultivation. Ling Taihan, on the other hand, had to spend at least half a year cultivating behind closed doors. If Ling Taihan's current achievements were 30% talent and 70% hard work, then Mo Xiaoyao's would be 70% talent and 30% hard work. But now, it seemed that hard work in cultivation had a more solid foundation. Mo Xiaoyao could not help but admit that even if he did not lose to Ling Taihan, he was still slightly inferior. We're not of the same mind. Or does Prince also plan on becoming the #1 person in the martial arts world? Yili did not plan on comforting him and only said lightly. No matter how high Mo Xiaoyao's martial arts were, he still needed to focus on the Mahist army and the people of the Northwest. Even if he became the #1 expert in the world, he could not rely on himself to sweep the world. There was nothing wrong with working hard to improve one's own strength, but if one only focused on improving one's individual strength and ignored the bigger picture, then it would be putting the cart before the horse. Mo Xiaoyao originally did not have any intention of harping on this. He said this in front of Yili to seek comfort. Hearing Yili say this, he naturally did not mind. He smiled and said, this place is not bad. If we go back to the city, people will disturb us. I want to rest here for a while. Li, can you wait for me? Yili nodded in agreement. Mo Xiaoyao did not say anything else. He sat in the pavilion and closed his eyes to circulate his internal energy to heal himself. Mo Xiaoyao sat there for half a day and an entire night. He did not know if it was because of Miss Mu Rong at the foot of the mountain, but on this day, no one came up to the mountain to play. Yili did not disturb Mo Xiaoyao. At night, she casually picked a few wild fruits not far from the pavilion and ate them. The next morning, when the sun rose from the sea of clouds in the east, Mo Xiaoyao finally opened his eyes. His eyes, which had just opened, flashed with a bright light. His originally cold exterior seemed to have a trace of gentleness. Mo Xiaoyao turned his head to look at the girl leaning against a pillar and sleeping. His eyes filled with endless tenderness. When Mo Xiaoyao stood up, Yili opened her eyes. Done. It's been hard on you, Li. How about you sleep a bit more? Mo Xiaoyao hugged her and looked at his body as he spoke softly. Yili shook her head. She leaned against his chest for a while before saying, let's go down the mountain. I'm a bit hungry. You haven't eaten for a day, so you must be hungry too. Not resting for 1 or 2 nights was nothing to them. Moreover, she had leaned against him to sleep for half the night. Yili did not like to starve herself if there was no need. Mo Xiaoyao hugged her and laughed in a low voice. All right, then let's go down the mountain. Mo Xiaoyao and Yili not returning for an entire night did not affect anyone. Ren Qining did notice, but he had many things to do. Naturally, He did not have time to ask about the whereabouts of these two people whose identities he did not even know yet. So when the city gates opened early in the morning, Mo Xiaoyao and Yili strolled back to the inn in the capital without attracting anyone's attention. The two sat in the main hall of the inn and ordered breakfast. As they ate, they listened to the people who were also eating talk about what happened at Xiaoning Temple yesterday. Miss Murong's grand appearance at Xiaoning Temple naturally attracted the attention of countless people. It was said that at the entrance of the temple, a sudden breeze blew off Miss Murong's veil. The beauty of the woman under the veil was peerless, causing many heroes of Jianghu to be intoxicated. A perfectly good Buddhist holy land was suddenly filled with charm and gentleness. Yili listened with interest. She tilted her head and asked Mo Xiaoyao, "Is Miss Murong really that peerless?" She had also seen Miss Murong. Although only her eyes could be seen because of the veil, Yili felt that at least that pair of eyes could not compare to Su Zui's, concubine Lu's, or even Yaoji's. Under that pair of eyes, Yili felt that even if Miss Murong really was a beauty, it would not be to the point of being peerless. Mo Xiaoyao indifferently said, "It's only so-so." Yili tilted her head and looked at him. She smiled and said, "Prince has high standards." In this world, Mo Xiaoyao had seen almost all of the women who were famous for their beauty. It was no wonder that he did not like Miss Murong. Mo Xiaoyao looked at Yili with a smile that was not a smile and softly said, "I naturally have high standards. Otherwise, how could I have such a good wife like Miss Li?" Yili curled her lips. Did he choose her? But after all these years, Yili also understood that if Mo Xiaoyao really did not want to marry her, there were many ways to stop this marriage. Then I still have to thank Prince for thinking so highly of me. Wife, you don't have to be so polite. This husband also has to thank wife for not disliking me. These two people were not easy to deal with. If they did not want to marry her, don't even mention that it was a marriage arranged by Mo Jingqi, even if it was the heavenly emperor, they would still be able to make it disappear. What is Miss Murong's intention? Yili frowned and asked in a low voice. It just so happened that the wind blew off the veil at the entrance of the temple. This kind of inexplicable coincidence really made people speechless. Only those who had used the veil knew how much wind was needed to blow it off. Chapter 540. Mo Xiaoyao lightly snorted, choosing a son-in-law. Not everyone in this world loves money. If there are too few people going, wouldn't the Murong family lose face? When the time comes, the noble young masters who come forward to compete will also feel embarrassed. Yili raised her eyebrows. Mo Xiaoyao had nothing to do now, so he didn't want to think about this problem. She shrugged her shoulders. She also didn't want to think about these problems. After all, Big Brother was here. Alright, let's just watch the show. There's no point in thinking too much. Mo Xiaoyao nodded in satisfaction. Wife, you finally understand your husband's intentions. Soon, it was time for the martial arts convention that everyone had been waiting for. The martial arts convention was held in a large open space outside the Murong family home. It could be built into a large plaza. On the day of the convention, Mo Xiaoyao and Yili arrived at the right time. By the time they arrived at the Murong family home, the venue was already packed with people. Not only were there Jianghu masters and nobles, there were also in cities commoners who came to join in the fun. What surprised Yili was that even Genom of Gojoseon and Mo Jingqi had personally come. Genom of Gojoseon wasn't a big deal. He was from Xiling and was one of the 4 great masters. It was natural for him to appear at the martial arts convention. However, Mo Jingqi had never left the Chu capital even when he was a prince, let alone when he was the emperor. Could it be that the Murong family's attraction was more important than his own life? Xiaoyao. Seeing Mo Jingqi, Yili's first reaction was to turn around and look at Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Xiaoyao lowered his head and smiled faintly at her. Don't worry, I won't do anything to him now. If it was 6 years ago when he suddenly saw Mo Jingqi, Mo Xiaoyao might not have been able to stop himself from killing Mo Jingqi on the spot. But 6 years later, the deep-rooted hatred was still there, but the impulse had gradually disappeared. He would not let Mo Jingqi die so easily. He wanted him to beg for death. Seeing that Mo Xiaoyao was very calm, Yili felt reassured and continued to size him up. Only now did she realize that the people by Mo Jingqi's side were all top-notch experts. Although they couldn't compare to Mo Xiaoyao and the others, any one of them would definitely be a famous figure in Jianghu. This made Yili wonder if Mo Jingqi had mobilized all the experts he could from the Chu state's royal family. Although Mo Jingqi and his brother were both very annoying, in comparison, Mo Jingli's courage was at least a little better than his older brother, the emperor. At the very front, there were many tables and chairs. On the tables were fresh seasonal fruits that had been specially bought from the south of the Chu state. These seats were naturally reserved for people with status and fame. Mo Xiaoyao and Yili were just a pair of unknown husband and wife. Naturally, they didn't have the right to sit in those seats. The two of them were standing under a large tree not far from the viewing platform. If they were tired, they could lean against the tree trunk and rest for a while, or just sit up in the tree. Genom of Gojoseon, who had arrived first, was currently leading Lei Tingfeng and Mo Jingqi and his brother in a discussion. Yili asked curiously, Lei Tingfeng seems to have already married the heir consort. Genom of Gojoseon wouldn't also be interested in Murong Xiaojie, right? Mo Xiaoyao held her waist and lazily leaned against the tree trunk. What's so strange about that? Genom of Gojoseon's princess consort has passed away many years ago. However, the Murong family might not be interested in Jinan Palace. It wasn't that Jinan Palace wasn't powerful enough, but that they were too powerful. Unfortunately, Genom of Gojoseon and the Murong family were both in Xiling. No matter who Murong Xiaojie married from Jinan Palace, the Murong family could be said to have ceased to exist. Yili understood and frowned in confusion. If I were a member of the Murong family, I would be more low-key and find a capable and reliable person to support the Murong family. With Murong Xiong holding the fort, I'm afraid that not many people would have the guts to cause trouble. Now, aren't we inviting a wolf into the house? Or does Murong Xiong already have the ability to fight against the heroes of the world? Mo Xiaoyao smiled, just like what my wife said. Some people just like to make their presence known. Most of the important tasks had already been taken, so the few empty seats were particularly eye-catching. Genom of Gojoseon glanced at the seat opposite him and raised his eyebrows. Prince Ding didn't attend this year's martial arts competition. Lei Tingfeng smiled. Prince Ding didn't wait for Princess Anqi's wedding and rushed back to the northwest with the princess consort. I'm afraid that he had something to do and couldn't come. No matter how smart the people present were, they would never have thought that someone would skip the coronation of a country's monarch just to accompany his wife on a sightseeing tour. Therefore, everyone believed that Prince Ding and the princess consort rushed back to the northwest because of something important. Not being able to fight with Prince Ding again is Ai's greatest regret. Genom of Gojoseon said with some regret, but he was already calculating the recent movements in the northwest. He did get the news that Prince Ding and Princess Ding had returned to the northwest. The Mahist army in the northwest also showed signs of mobilization, but it didn't look like they were going to start a war. Genom of Gojoseon couldn't guess what Mo Xiaoyao was going to do, but to be on the safe side, Genom of Gojoseon secretly mobilized 200,000 troops to strengthen the border guards with the northwest. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come to participate in this so-called martial arts convention. Genom of Gojoseon choked. Although he was here, he didn't plan to fight. As he grew older, Genom of Gojoseon no longer focused on martial arts. No matter how invincible one's martial arts were, how could it compare to the pleasure of ruling the world? Master Murong has arrived. Lady Murong has arrived. The announcement rang out in the hall again. Genom of Gojosian and the others' faces darkened in displeasure. They were all powerful figures and were used to being arrogant and domineering. What they hated the most was for others to be more ostentatious than them. If this person was evenly matched with them, then so be it, but a mere merchant should be the same. The ones with the ugliest expressions were Genom of Gojosian and Ladingfeng. After all, the Murong family was located within Xiling and could be considered a subject of Xiling. Not long after, Master Murong, who was over 60 years old and had white hair and a beard, led Lady Murong, who was dressed in a light purple robe embroidered with a hibiscus pattern, out of the Murong family's gate. As they walked, the people in the hall naturally opened up a path for them. It looked like the crowd was lining the road to welcome them. The crowd quickly noticed that there was an old man who looked about the same age as Master Murong walking beside him. He was not dressed extravagantly, and even his appearance was not particularly outstanding. Most people might not have noticed it, but Ling Taihan and Genom of Gojosian's expressions changed. They both looked at each other. The old man's aura was clearly 10 times or even 100 times stronger than Master Murong's. Although his appearance was not eye-catching, he could walk side by side with Master Murong. If one looked closely, they would notice that Master Murong was also respectful and careful towards him. The two of them did not need to think too much to guess the old man's true identity. Master Murong walked forward and looked at the people in the hall. His gaze paused for a moment at the empty seat left for Prince Ding. His gaze darkened slightly, but he said with a smile on his face, "I am the current master of the Murong clan. Thank you for giving me the honor of joining the martial arts tournament. For the sake of fairness in this martial arts conference, the Murong family has specially invited Senior Murong Xiong, the #1 expert in Jianghu 50 years ago, to be the judge." When he said this, the crowd was in an uproar. They all looked at the plain-clothed old man who had sat down at the head of the table as soon as he arrived. They were originally guessing the old man's identity, but now that they knew who he was, they immediately burst into a discussion. Master Murong was obviously satisfied with the crowd's shock. He nodded and said with a smile, "Senior Murong has been in seclusion for more than 10 years, and his martial arts can be said to be unparalleled. He is naturally the most suitable person to be the judge." Ling Taihan sneered and said indifferently, "Why have I never heard that the martial arts conference needs a judge? The experts in the martial arts conference always fought until one side was convinced, so there was naturally no need for a judge." Master Murong's face froze. He glanced at Ling Taihan and smiled faintly. Since this conference is held in the Murong family, and the Murong family has never liked to see blood, naturally, we will not overdo it. Ling Taihan snorted and leaned back in his chair without saying anything. As for Lady Murong, who was standing behind Master Murong, he did not even look at her. Such a rude action really embarrassed Master Murong. He glanced at Murong Xiong, who had sat down and closed his eyes. Master Murong was about to say something when he heard someone report loudly from outside, "Glass City's Master Qingchen has arrived." Chapter 541. This simple announcement caused many people's expressions to change. The first person to change his expression was Imo Jingqi. Although everyone knew that the Northwest and Dechu state had broken off relations, Imo Jingqi stubbornly refused to admit that it was his failure that forced Prince Ding and the Mahist army to break off relations with the Dechu state. It was Imo Xiuyao's ambitious rebellion. Thus, no one cared about what the people thought. However, in the imperial court, the ministers had no choice but to follow the emperor's preference and call Prince Ding a traitor. Although they felt a chill down their spines when they called him that, who told them to eat the emperor's rice. Now that Su Qingchen had openly used the title of Glass City, it was a heavy slap to Imo Jingqi's face. More importantly, it wasn't just the Prince Ding mansion and the Mahist army. The Su family had also been forced out by him. Now that young Master Qin Chin had appeared here with great fanfare using Mo Xiuyao's name, wasn't he telling the world that the person Mo Jingqi didn't dare to use, Mo Xiuyao dared to use? The Su family had been hidden away in the Dechu state, but immediately held great power in the northwest. Under this comparison, it was obvious who was superior and who was inferior. It would be strange if Mo Jingqi's expression didn't look good. Then there were Mo Jingli and Lei Tingfeng, as well as a few other young talents with ulterior motives. After all, when Lady Murong was choosing a son-in-law, the man's appearance would definitely have an advantage. Among the people present, there were probably less than 2 or 3 who could compare to young Master Qin Chin in terms of appearance. Everyone could only rejoice that young Master Qin Chin didn't know martial arts. Otherwise, the Murong family probably wouldn't have needed to compete and would have chosen directly. As for the other 2 important figures present, Ling Taihan and Su Qingqin did not have any conflict of interest. Moreover, the 2 of them were quite close, so they nodded at Su Qingqin as a form of greeting. As for Genom of Gojoseon, although young Master Qingqin was famous all over the world, he had never fought with Genom of Gojoseon. Moreover, the 2 of them were not from the same generation. Among the younger generation, the only one who could make Genom of Gojoseon a worthy opponent was Mo Xiuyao. Therefore, he did not think much of Su Qingqin. Su Qingqin had already trained himself to be indifferent to both honor and disgrace in his youth, so how could he care about such a small scene? Young Master Qingqin was dressed in white robes as he strolled over. There was a smile on his face that was like pear blossoms in spring. The countless Jianghu heroines present could not help but gasp and blush. Miss Murong, who was standing beside Lord Murong, couldn't help but stare blankly. She thought highly of herself and had seen a lot of talented people these days. However, she had never seen young Master Qin Chen's celestial demeanor. At this time, Miss Murong did not remember what her grandfather and granduncle had told her. Her heart was beating wildly. "Everyone, please forgive me for being late." Su Qingqin cupped his hands and smiled. Genom of Gojoseon laughed loudly and said, "Young Master Qingqin is too polite. Please sit. I wonder if Prince Ding and Princess Consort can come." Su Qingqin said calmly, "Thank you for your concern. Prince Ding and Princess Consort are busy with worldly affairs and have no time to spare. Therefore, they could only let an idle person like me come to join in the fun. I hope everyone will not mind." Everyone present was polite. Everyone present was an influential person from various countries. Naturally, they knew that this celestial man in front of them was not an idle person. Although Mo Xiuyao's civil officials did not have a clear position, everyone knew that young Master Qin Chen's power in the northwest was not inferior to a country's prime minister. Humph. The guests present were extremely polite. As the host, Master Murong's face was not very good. The Murong family and the Su family could be said to be the 2 oldest families that had been passed down for generations. However, although Murong family was the richest in the world, they had always had a knot in their hearts towards Su family. There was no other reason. Su family was a family of scholars. For generations, great scholars and famous ministers came out in large numbers. Their name resounded throughout the world and was revered by tens of thousands of people. However, because Murong family was a merchant family, they could not even enter the imperial court. Once they became rich enough to rival a country, they had to endure all kinds of attacks from the royal family, both overt and covert. No one would believe that the royal family of West Hill did not contribute to the decline of the Murong family until now. Although the Su family and the Murong family were both suppressed by the imperial family, even if the Su family were to fall one day, they would still be able to leave their name in history. After all, if the Su family's contributions to the imperial family were to be completely erased, then the historical records would have to be rewritten. As for Murong family, once they were destroyed, who would remember them? What's more, Su family had found a powerful nephew-in-law. They also had fifth brother's son who had extraordinary ability. Once Prince Ding's power stabilized in the future, Su family would clearly rise again, even more than before. On the other hand, Murong family was so poor that they only had money left. How could people not sigh? This light snort shook the hearts of everyone present. Su Qingshan's expression changed slightly. In fact, he did not feel it too deeply. However, when he saw the reaction of Genom of Gojoseon and Ling Taihan, he understood that the light snort was not that simple. Su Qingshan turned to look at Murong Xiong, who was sitting at the head of the table. He cupped his hands and said, "Senior Murong, this junior has been rude. Please forgive me." Murong Xiong's snort contained a special kind of internal energy. It was only effective against people who also had internal energy. The deeper the internal energy, the more powerful it was. Unfortunately, he had retired from Jianghu for too long. He had never considered the possibility that Su Qingshan did not know martial arts. Moreover, Su Qingshan's bearing was outstanding. His elegance was restrained. Even when interacting with experts like Genom of Gojoseon and Ling Taihan, he did not retreat in the slightest. Murong Xiong only became more and more convinced that Su Qingshan used some kind of special method to conceal his martial arts. Jianghu originally had such a method. At this time, seeing that Su Qingshan's expression did not change, his expression could not help but become more serious. "Why didn't Prince Ding come?" Murong Xiong asked in a deep voice. His tone was somewhat tyrannical. Immediately, many people present felt displeased. For example, Genom of Gojoseon and the others all wished that they could be born with a 7-orifices heart. They thought 10 times more than ordinary people. Although most of them did not see eye to eye with Mo Xiuyao, Mo Xiuyao's ability and status at least made them accept him wholeheartedly. This old man spoke in such a tone, full of arrogance and bossiness. Not only did he not put Mo Xiuyao in his eyes, but he also did not put them in his eyes. Genom of Gojoseon's expression did not change. His gaze indifferently swept past Ling Taihan, Mo Jingli and the others. His eyes were slightly cold. This old man did not think that after not appearing for a few decades, everyone in the world would listen to him now that he had come out of seclusion. Stupid. Su Qingshan was not angry. The smile on his face did not decrease at all. He calmly said, "Prince Ding and the princess are tied up with business and have no time to attend this year's martial arts convention. I have already apologized to Genom of Gojoseon and Pavilion Master Ling on behalf of Prince Ding. The two of you do not mind. With Mo Xiuyao's martial arts and status, only Genom of Gojoseon and Ling Taihan could fight with him. If it was only the martial arts convention, if the two of them did not mind, then naturally no one had the right to say anything. Moreover, participation in the martial arts convention was voluntary. If Prince Ding did not want to come, then no one could stop him. However, Murong Xiong was not satisfied with this result. He said in a low voice, "This old man sent an invitation to Prince Ding. Why did he not come?" Su Qingshan slightly frowned. His gaze swept over Miss Murong, who was standing next to Master Murong. He did not immediately answer Murong Xiong's question. Instead, he turned around and walked to the empty seat next to Ling Taihan and sat down. Seeing that Murong Xiong was about to explode in anger, he slowly said, "Our prince said that he has no interest in anything other than the martial arts convention." Chapter 542. Everyone present was silent. What did he mean by something other than the martial arts assembly? Almost everyone's eyes fell on Miss Murong. Miss Murong was originally looking at young Master Qingshan in a daze, but now she was ashamed and angry, wishing she could find a hole to hide in. Rude brat. Murong Xiong flew into a rage and slapped the air in the direction of Su Qingshan's seat. The air was so strong that it was almost suffocating, and it pressed down on Su Qingshan from all directions. Young Master Qingshan. The two guards beside Su Qingshan were shocked and stepped forward, one in front and one behind Su Qingshan. Ling Taihan, who was sitting beside Su Qingshan, also put a hand on Su Qingshan's shoulder at the same time. The two guards in front of Su Qingshan swayed, but soon they stood still. A trace of blood flowed out of the lips of the man standing in front, but he didn't seem to feel the pain. He wiped the blood away and was helped back to stand behind Su Qingshan by his companion. Ling Taihan also calmly withdrew his hand, but his eyes were still vigilantly staring at Murong Xiong in front of him. His sharp eyes revealed a hint of eagerness. Su Qingshan sat calmly behind the table, and even his hair didn't move in the slightest. It was as if the murderous palm didn't happen at all. Young Master Qingshan took a sip of tea and thanked him gracefully. "Thank you, Senior Murong, for showing mercy." Murong Xiong snorted and sat back in his seat, no longer speaking. He stared at Su Qingshan with eyes full of gloominess and inquiry. Murong Xiong certainly couldn't kill Su Qingshan. Perhaps it would be easy to kill Su Qingshan. Murong Xiong even felt that it wouldn't be difficult to kill Mo Xiuyao with his martial arts. But as long as he wasn't crazy, he couldn't do that. He could kill Su Qingshan and Mo Xiuyao, but he couldn't kill hundreds of thousands of Mahist army. When the time came, the Mahist army would flatten the Murong family. The so-called bargaining chip was a bargaining chip because it was useless to hold it in one's hand. Once it was used, it would be a life-and-death battle. Murong Xiong was slapped in the face by Su Qingshan on the spot. Naturally, Master Murong's face didn't look good either. He put away all the nonsense he had prepared and announced the start of the martial arts tournament with an indifferent expression. In truth, according to the usual practice, there was not much to see on the first day of the martial arts tournament. The first day was mostly filled with rookies from Jianghu going up to fight. The real excitement came on the second and third days. Of course, sometimes the third day of the competition would end very quickly, and sometimes it would extend to the fourth or fifth day, depending on the strength of the remaining experts. Naturally, he had no fate with Miss Murong. Then it wasn't that important whether or not they watched the competition, right? Mo Xiuyao and Yili didn't personally attend the competition on the first and second day. Mo Xiuyao was an expert at this level, so he naturally didn't care about the small fights between the so-called experts on the stage. He only heard that in these 2 days, there were a few young experts who stood out and killed their way into the top 10. Among them was Ren Qining, who they had met several times. At the same time, the head of the Murong family announced at the end of the second day that he would choose a husband for his granddaughter from the top 10 experts. Once this announcement was made, it was unknown how many people were stirred up. At the same time, a letter from Su Qingshan was delivered to Yili and Mo Xiuyao's room. "Big brother, what are your plans?" In Su Qingshan's room, Yili sat at the table and drank tea. Mo Xiuyao leisurely leaned against the window and enjoyed the scenery in the distance. Su Qingshan sat to the side and looked at Yili. Then he turned to Mo Xiuyao and said, "Prince, what do you think?" Mo Xiuyao turned around and lazily said, "Didn't I leave this matter to Brother Qingshan to handle? Brother Qingshan can do as he sees fit. This small matter shouldn't be too difficult for Brother Qingshan, right?" Su Qingshan didn't comment and lightly said, "Murong Xiong's idea is indeed whimsical, but there are definitely many people who are interested in this matter. After all, the Murong family's wealth is comparable to a country." Before today, Mo Jingqi had already sent people to contact the head of the Murong family. Mo Xiuyao coldly snorted and said, "Mo Jingqi is becoming less and less picky. Whatever smells good or smells bad, he's taking it back." Su Qingshan helplessly smiled and said, prince doesn't need to be so harsh. Let's not talk about Miss Murong for now. At the very least, the wealth of the Murong family can only be fought for by anyone. From the perspective of an official, Su Qingchen would also advise Mo Xiaoyao to marry a girl from the Murong family. After all, marrying a girl to obtain such a large amount of wealth, why not? However, Mo Xiaoyao was not only the person he had to support, but also his brother-in-law. For the Murong family should not even think about setting foot in the Prince Ding mansion. But what the Prince Ding mansion doesn't want, he can't let anyone else have it. Su Qingchen's gentle eyes flashed with a trace of coldness. Big brother. Yili somewhat worriedly looked at Su Qingchen. Mo Xiaoyao stubbornly pushed everything to his big brother. Although his big brother's intelligence was outstanding, the people he had to come into contact with were all people of the Wulin. Sometimes people of Jianghu moved faster than their brains, so there was still a certain amount of danger. Su Qingchen indifferently smiled. No matter, don't worry. Big brother will take care of everything. No one can threaten Li's position and happiness. Even if it was the #1 expert 50 years ago. Prince, if you want to deal with Murong Xiong, do you have confidence? Su Qingchen asked. Mo Xiaoyao frowned and muttered to himself for a moment before saying, at most, I only have a 30% chance. Murong Xiong's internal energy is far above mine. If I can't end the fight quickly, the one who loses in the end will be me. Ordinary experts fight with internal energy and physical strength. But for experts at their level, the so-called physical strength has no meaning. So as long as Murong Xiong isn't old to the point of dying, they won't have the chance to compete with him in terms of physical strength. Because he can firmly suppress them with his internal energy. So Murong Xiong's old age can't be considered a weakness. Su Qingchen casually tapped on the table and asked after a while, if one prince isn't enough, then what about 2 or 3? You mean? Mo Xiaoyao stood up and stared at Su Qingchen. Su Qingchen looked down and calmly said, Murong family's ambition isn't small, but Murong Xiong is old. That temperament, sooner or later he'll be a disaster. His calm tone carried a faint killing intent. Mo Xiaoyao stared at him for a while before saying, there's no need for 3. I and Ling Taihan or Lei Jinting can deal with Murong Xiong. That's good. Su Qingchen nodded with satisfaction and said, then, maybe we don't need Prince Ding to come out. If Mo Xiaoyao and Ling Taihan or Lei Jinting can deal with Murong Xiong, then even without Mo Xiaoyao, they can still deal with Murong Xiong. Big brother, Murong Xiong's martial arts are too high. I'm afraid the Murong family isn't completely unprepared. You must be careful. Yili said softly. Su Qingchen nodded with a warm smile, but there was a slight sharpness between his brows. Don't worry. Reporting to young Master Qingchen, Miss Murong requests an audience. The guard outside the door respectfully reported. Su Qingchen frowned and lightly said, invite Miss Murong up. Chapter 543. Since Lady Murong was here, Yili and Mo Xiaoyao naturally could not stay any longer. However, the two of them did not leave. Mo Xiaoyao casually picked up the teacups that the two of them had just drunk from and pulled Yili through a secret door. Su Qingchen naturally had his reasons for choosing this inn to stay in. This was originally the Prince Ding Mansion's secret base in An City. As the 4th largest city in the Western Tomb, the Prince Ding Mansion naturally would not ignore this. Behind the secret door was a small secret room. The inside was not as well furnished as the outside. There was only a table, a few stools, and a bamboo couch. The two of them had just sat down when Lady Murong's voice and Su Qingchen's voice came from outside the door. Su Qingchen lowered his head to look at the finely dressed woman standing in front of him. He smiled faintly and said, "Lady Murong, how may I help you?" Lady Murong's beautiful eyes, which were exposed outside the veil, stared blankly at Su Qingshan. However, she saw that the man standing at the door with an elegant and refined smile had no intention of inviting her in. She could not help but bite the corner of her lips and asked, "Sir Qingshan, are you not going to invite me in?" Su Qingshan smiled faintly and said, "It's getting late, Lady Murong, for you to come here at this time. I'm afraid that it will damage your reputation. Lady, please go back." After saying this, Su Qingshan took a step back. It was obvious that he intended to close the door again. Lady Murong panicked and reached out to pull on Su Qingshan's sleeve. "Sir Qingshan." Su Qingshan looked at her in surprise. He did not think that Lady Murong was also a martial artist. Although Su Qingshan himself did not know martial arts, there was no lack of experts among the people he knew. Therefore, with Su Qingshan's insight, he could naturally judge that Lady Murong's strength was above average. Among women, she was not bad. "Lady Murong, why are you doing this?" Su Qingshan pulled back his sleeve and asked calmly with lowered eyes. "Sir Qingshan, Ming Yan has something to discuss with you alone. Please forgive me." Lady Murong looked up at Su Qingshan and said earnestly. Su Qingshan muttered to himself for a moment. In the end, he took a step back and let her in. The Murong clan lady heaved a sigh of relief at Su Qingshan's compromise. She stepped into Su Qingshan's room. Su Qingshan's room was very quiet and elegant. It was very different from the elegant and luxurious Murong family. Lady Murong turned around to look at Su Qingshan, who was dressed in white and elegant. She suddenly felt a little embarrassed. She was originally very confident in herself. She was the most beautiful girl in An City and the only successor of the Murong family. Therefore, she could use the most beautiful jewelry, the most luxurious clothes, and the most exquisite and delicious food. But when she saw the man in front of her, she suddenly felt ashamed of her gorgeous clothes. It was as if the jewelry and brocade clothes that people envied had become vulgar in an instant. She even began to regret listening to the maid's idea of dressing up so grandly to meet young Master Qingshan. Would he despise her for being vulgar? Yes, the Su family had been a scholarly family for generations. Naturally, they liked elegant and quiet things. Thinking of this, Miss Murong wished she could immediately go back and teach the girl who gave her the idea a lesson. "Miss Murong, please have a seat. Please have some tea." Su Qingshan sat down and poured a cup of tea for her. Miss Murong thanked him and took a sip of the tea. But she couldn't help but frown. Ever since she was young, she had always used the best and the most exquisite things. Even the princess of the imperial family might not be as precious as her. The tea that Su Qingshan poured for her wasn't of the best quality. Even the tea wasn't freshly brewed. If someone else had given her such tea, she definitely wouldn't drink it. However, when she saw Su Qingshan sipping her tea without any change in her expression, it was obvious that she didn't feel anything wrong at all. She could only silently endure it. Seeing the woman's frown and forbearance, Su Qingshan's eyes flashed with a cold smile. Of course, he knew what she was enduring and why she was enduring it. Tasting tea was naturally a matter of elegance, and the Su family had always been better at it than any other family. Naturally, Su Qingshan knew that the tea in this inn wasn't of the best quality. But even though Su Qingshan was a romantic and elegant scholar, he couldn't do anything about it. When he was extremely busy with work, it was already good enough to have a sip of tea. Who would pay attention to the quality of the tea leaves, the quality of the water used to brew the tea, and whether the temperature was just right? "Miss Murong, what do you have to say?" Su Qingshan asked bluntly. Miss Murong had clearly never met a man who was so rude to her. It wasn't that Su Qingchen was rude to her. In fact, Su Qingchen was more humble and polite than most men she had met. But his every word and action made it clear that he didn't care about her. Miss Murong bit her lip, feeling wronged. She raised her hand and removed the veil that had been covering her face, revealing a beautiful face. However, this time, Miss Murong was disappointed. Su Qingchen's eyes didn't waver at all when he looked at her. It was as if it had nothing to do with him whether the woman in front of him had a veil over her face or whether she was beautiful or unbeautiful. Miss Murong stared at Su Qingchen for a long time. When she was finally sure that he didn't care about her appearance, she lowered her eyes to hide her vexation and frustration. "My name is Murong Minyan." "Greetings, Sir Qingchen." The room was silent but Murong Minyan was secretly gloomy. She had only noticed Sir Qingchen's gentle and refined appearance but had forgotten that he had dared to slap her granduncle and the Murong family in the face. How could he be an easy person to talk to? After waiting for a long time for Su Qingchen to speak, Murong Minyan stared at the cold-hearted man in front of her with grief. She gritted her teeth and said, "Sir Qingchen, are you willing to marry into the Murong family?" When these words came out, not to mention the shadow guard who was secretly protecting Su Qingchen, even Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li who were in the secret room couldn't help but change their expressions. Yi Li's charming face sank and said coldly, "This Murong Minyan has guts." Mo Xiaoyao nodded in agreement. "Indeed, she has guts. The Murong family dared to steal his woman. Did they not want to live anymore?" Su Qingchen who was outside was as calm as ever. He said indifferently, "Miss Murong, what do you mean?" A bitter smile appeared on Murong Minyan's beautiful face. She stared blankly at Su Qingchen and said, "Sir Qingchen, you must have heard my grandfather's words. They will choose one of the top 10 experts to be my son-in-law." Su Qingchen lowered his eyes and said, "I don't know martial arts. Not to mention the top 10 experts, I can't even defeat a third-rate expert. I'm afraid Miss Murong has found the wrong person." Murong Minyan shook her head and said, "No, Sir Qingchen is different. Sir Qingchen is famous throughout the world and has outstanding wisdom. If Sir Qingchen is willing to marry into the Murong family, even if my grandfather is the world's #1 expert, he will give him up." Looking at Su Qingchen's indifferent expression, Murong Minyan said hesitantly, "Sir, you're not willing." "I'm not worthy of Miss Murong," Su Qingchen said modestly. In reality, he was rejecting Murong Minyan's suggestion. Murong Minyan's expression changed slightly. "Why? As long as you marry me, the entire Murong family will be yours. Isn't having the entire Murong family 1,000 times better than Sir Qingchen working for Prince Ding in Glass City? Or am I not beautiful enough and not worthy of Sir Qingchen?" Chapter 544. Su Qingchen shook his head and looked at Murong Minyan with a smile. "Miss Murong, marriage is all about fate. Miss Murong and I are not fated to be together. Please don't force it. With Miss Murong's talent and the Murong family's wealth, there are many talented young men in this world who would be willing to marry Miss Murong." A teenage girl who came to ask a man if he was willing to marry her received such a result. Murong Minyan's eyes flashed with sparkling tears. She looked at Su Qingchen unwillingly and said, "Does young Master Qingchen already have a sweetheart?" "No. Minyan has never heard of young Master Qingchen being close to any girl. Even Nanzhao's Princess Anxi is already married. I don't believe that there is a girl more worthy of young Master Qingchen than Minyan." Young Master Qingchen leisurely drank the cool tea and looked at the tear-stained girl in front of him. He said calmly, "Sometimes marriage is not related to being worthy or not. Maybe one day I will meet a suitable girl. She may not be talented or beautiful. She may also come from a mediocre family. Miss Murong, it is meaningless to judge whether you are worthy or not. I believe Miss Murong has nothing else to say. Please leave. Being rejected by Su Qingchen so mercilessly, Murong Mingyan's bright face was full of embarrassment. She stared at Su Qingchen with a trace of resentment in her beautiful eyes. She gritted her teeth and said, "It's not like no one saw me when I came in. If I say that there is something between us, do you think the world will believe you or me more?" Su Qingchen looked at Murong Mingyan helplessly and shook his head. "Miss Murong, if you were a girl from an ordinary family, the world would believe you more. But I am afraid that the entire city will believe me more." In the eyes of the world, Murong Mingyan could do anything she wanted. Who would believe that someone who had a mountain of gold would push it away? Not to mention that there was nothing going on between him and Murong Mingyan. Even if there was something going on between them, many people would be willing to believe that they were innocent. Compared to the entire Murong family, one woman was simply too insignificant. Murong Mingyan was stunned, but she quickly understood Su Qingchen's meaning. Since her threat failed, Murong Mingyan's pretty face blushed. She bit the corner of her lips and said bitterly, "I must make you marry me." Su Qingchen smiled but didn't say anything. His calm eyes said very clearly, "I will never marry you." In the end, Murong Mingyan left with tears in her eyes. Su Qingchen smiled faintly. She closed the door and sat down again to pour herself a cup of tea. "Big brother, what does that Murong Mingyan mean?" Yili pushed open the door and walked over to Su Qingchen's side. Mo Xiaoyao followed behind her and said teasingly, "Do you even need to ask?" Naturally, it was young Master Qingchen's extraordinary handsomeness that attracted Miss Murong's heart. Other than Genom of Gojoseon and Ling Taihan, and that Ren Qining, there was no one else in the top 10 experts. Genom of Gojoseon isn't young and has lost a fortune. Ling Taihan is the head of the Jianghu's assassins. Ren Qining isn't very famous. When Miss Murong really admires young Master Ai, she naturally wants to choose a husband that she likes. Yili frowned and snorted. She wants Big Brother to marry into the family just because she likes him. Who does she think she is? If Big Brother really took things too hard and agreed, wouldn't his legs be broken by grandfather and uncle? It was one thing for the dignified eldest son of the Su family to marry into the Shang family, but he even chose such a self-righteous woman. Su Qingchen smiled and took a teacup from the side. He poured her a cup of herbal tea and said with a smile, "Big Brother doesn't plan to marry right now. Moreover, this is just Murong Mingyan's own fantasy. How could Murong Xiong and Murong family head agree? Between us, Pavilion Master Ling is more likely. Murong family definitely wouldn't let their daughter marry into the family of the Emperor of Xiling, so their choices were extremely limited. If they wanted to fight against Genom of Gojoseon, Miss Murong could only marry Mo Jingqi, Ling Taihan, and Mo Xiaoyao. Unfortunately, Mo Xiaoyao didn't appear at all, so the final choice would only be between Mo Jingqi and Ling Taihan. Su Qingchen thought that Ling Taihan had a higher chance. After all, the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce was also within Xiling, and the marriage alliance with the Murong family could be said to be a strong cooperation. Moreover, Ling Taihan and Genom of Gojoseon had a grudge, but the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce and Ling Taihan had existed steadily for so many years. This also showed that Genom of Gojoseon was afraid of Ling Taihan. Mo Xiaoyao frowned and thought, not necessarily. If young Master Qingchen is really willing to marry into the Murong family, Murong Xiong might give up on Ling Taihan. The marriage alliance between the Murong family and the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce was good, but in the end, the family head would no longer be a member of the Murong family. However, if the wise young Master Qingchen married into the family, it would be completely different. He could rely on the relationship between the Su family and the Prince Ding mansion to contain the Emperor of Shiling's family. He also had young Master Qinchen's peerless strategy and Murong Xiong's peerless martial arts. Genom of Gojoseon would have to think twice if he wanted to make a move on the Murong family. So, Brother Qinchen, this time you really have to be careful. Mo Xiaoyao earnestly warned. If he wasn't careful and lost a smart person to share the burden of government affairs, it would really cause him a lot of trouble. Su Qinchen thought about the possibility of what Mo Xiaoyao said. After a moment, he nodded and said with a smile, "Many thanks to Prince for the reminder." Since he said this, he naturally had a plan to deal with it. Mo Xiaoyao didn't say anything more. He held Yi Li's hand and stood up, saying, "Big brother can use whoever you need. Li and I will also stay in city. Be careful." Su Qinchen nodded indifferently and watched them leave. After sending off Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li, Su Qinchen frowned and thought about what might happen tomorrow. Under the candlelight, his handsome lips curved into a faint smile. There were many things that he didn't want to take too far if he could make concessions, but he hoped that the Murong family would be as tactful tomorrow. Young Master Qinchen. A shadow guard stood at the door and reported. Su Qinchen sat up straight and asked, "What's the matter?" The shadow guard walked in and presented a letter with both hands, saying, "The White Tiger just sent news." Su Qinchen took the letter and the shadow guard respectfully retreated. Su Qinchen opened the sealed envelope and saw a White Tiger logo on it. Su Qinchen picked at the handsome letter. This Ren Qining. He didn't seem to reveal his talent, but he was actually quite interesting. He could only blame himself for thinking that he was smart in testing Mo Xiaoyao and Li. He sealed the letter again and called for a shadow guard to deliver it to Prince Ding and Princess Consort. Su Qinchen shook his head and returned to his room to rest. Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao returned to the inn and was still smiling angrily. Mo Xiaoyao looked at her sullen expression and couldn't help but laugh. "Yi Li, how could your brother like that kind of woman? If you're this angry, your husband will be jealous." Yi Li rolled her eyes at him in annoyance. Mo Xiaoyao smiled and pulled her into his arms, saying, "Isn't that right? It's Brother Su's own marriage. Yi Li, if you're this worried about your husband, won't you be jealous?" Yi Li leaned into Mo Xiaoyao's arms and asked with some worry and hesitation, "Am I really meddling too much?" Actually, Miss Murong wasn't as bad as she thought. It was just that when it came to her brother, she always hoped for a more perfect woman. But just as her brother had said, whether or not one was compatible wasn't just based on external conditions. Seeing that Yi Li was so worried that she couldn't make up her mind, Mo Xiaoyao couldn't help but kiss her face a few times before saying with a muffled laugh, "Ollie, you're worried too much, that's why you're so worried. What kind of person is Brother Su? If he really likes her, even if you don't like her, how can you stop him? Since he says this, then he naturally doesn't like Murong Mingyan." Yi Li's eyes aren't wrong. This Murong Mingyan isn't worthy of Brother Su. At this time, Mo Xiaoyao didn't care how many good things he said about Su Qinchen. Yi Li's heart finally calmed down. She reminded herself to not express her opinions on who her brother was going to marry in the future. It was easy for people to be self-centered and think that this was good and that wasn't. As long as her brother thought that marriage was good, then other people didn't have to say anything. "Greetings, Your Highness, Your Highness." A black shadow silently appeared outside the room and respectfully stood with his hands clasped. Mo Xiaoyao frowned in displeasure. "What is it?" Master Qinchen ordered this subordinate to deliver a letter. "Bring it in." Mo Xiaoyao leaned against the bamboo couch and lazily said. The person outside hesitated but still walked in. The window in the inner room was half open. On the bamboo couch by the window, Prince was lazily leaning against Wang Fei's body, unwilling to get up. Just as he was thinking, a cold light shone on him. He couldn't help but tremble. He hurriedly presented the letter and cleanly said, "This subordinate will leave." Seeing that he was tactful, Mo Xiaoyao gave a non-committal snort. The person sending them off immediately rushed out like a gust of wind. Mo Xiaoyao was half lying on the bamboo couch, his head resting on Yi Li's lap. He unhurriedly opened the letter and after a while, he laughed in a low voice. Yi Li didn't understand. "What's wrong?" Mo Xiaoyao handed the letter to her and said with a smile, "I said that Murong family put on such a big show to attract a few powerful people. This year's martial arts convention was too dull. It seems that there will be a good show to watch tomorrow." Yi Li looked at the letter doubtfully. Her eyebrows gradually wrinkled. Even our people couldn't find Ren Qining's identity. This kind of person. Mo Xiaoyao made an excuse. This kind of person, either he has never appeared in Jianghu before, or he is a mysterious power that has been hidden for a long time. Hee, it's a bit interesting. Ren Qining came out of nowhere this time. It can't be just for the title of one of the top 10 experts, right? It seems that your brother's plan to unite with others to deal with Murong Xiong won't work. What do you think? What do I think? Isn't this matter in your brother's hands? Wife, we are just two insignificant passers-by. Don't worry. Chapter 545. Murong family residence. The magnificent villa was not the least bit inferior to the imperial family residence. Perhaps it was because the owner's family was few in number, but the entire villa faintly revealed a gloomy and decadent atmosphere. The extravagance that was piled up with countless priceless treasures gave people a heavy feeling that made it hard for them to breathe. Murong Mingyan stepped through the door, and there were already groups of servants waiting for her. When they saw her return, they hurriedly welcomed her with joy. "Eldest miss, you're finally back." Master was worried to death. Murong Mingyan frowned in disgust. She raised her head and looked at the group of servants with flattering faces in front of her. She also looked at the magnificent and majestic carved eaves and beams. She couldn't help but think of the elegant and otherworldly white-clothed man who looked like an immortal. Murong Mingyan bit the corner of her lips, and her eyes flashed with a determined light. Grandfather, great-granduncle. Before she could return to her room, Murong Mingyan was called to the study by Master Murong. Master Murong wasn't the only one in the study. Her great-granduncle Murong Xiong, who she had been afraid of since she was young, was also there. Master Murong coldly snorted and said, "You still know to come back. You are Murong family's eldest miss, who allowed you to run out?" Murong Mingyan lowered her head and helplessly twirled the silk in her hand. She didn't dare to speak. In the eyes of outsiders, she was Murong family's eldest Mississippi. But since she was young, she never had the right to speak in front of her grandfather and great-granduncle. All this time, she could only listen to what they said. But now, they were going to talk about her marriage. Master Murong saw her obedient appearance, and the anger in his heart subsided a little. He softened his tone and said, "Tomorrow is the last day of the martial arts convention. Your great-granduncle and I have already decided that you will be married to Yanwang Chamber's pavilion master, Ling Taihan. But Ling Taihan is already 40 years old." Murong Mingyan raised her head in astonishment and couldn't help but blurt out. 40 years old was already an old man to the 17-year-old Murong Mingyan. If her father was still alive, Ling Taihan would be a few years older than her father. "Shut up." Master Murong's face sank. He looked at Murong Mingyan with disappointment and said, "So what if he's 40 years old? With Ling Taihan's martial arts cultivation and status, he is still very young. How many people in this world do you think can stand up to Enchanting? I actually wanted to marry you to Prince Ding, but it's a pity that he doesn't like you and isn't even willing to come." Being mercilessly ridiculed by her own instructions, Murong Mingyan was so embarrassed that her entire face flushed red. Very quickly, Her complexion turned deathly pale, and she was unable to speak for a long time. In the end, she was his granddaughter, and she was his only bloodline in the world. Seeing her like this, Master Murong sighed and eased his expression. He said patiently, "We deliberately made such a scene for your sake. There were only a few truly capable people in this world. Prince Ding's refusal to come shows that he doesn't care about you or Murong family's wealth. Moreover, everyone knows that Prince Ding is deeply in love with Princess Ding. Even the capital of the Northwest is named after her. Prince Ding won't abandon his wife for the sake of his reputation and the Su family. Even if you marry him, you can only be a concubine. As for Emperor Chu and Prince Li, Emperor Chu already has the Lu family by his side. There's no room for us to interfere. I'm afraid that Prince Li won't be able to do much. But Ling Taihan is different. He is the master of Yanwang Chamber. He lives in Xiling, and he has a good relationship with Prince Ding. It was precisely because of this identity that no one dared to offend him even though he was not involved in any fights. Furthermore, Ling Taihan hasn't married yet. If you marry him, you'll be the wife of the pavilion master of the King of Hell's pavilion. You also have the support of the Murong family. Who in this world would dare to give you any face?" Murong Mingyan stubbornly bit her lip and didn't answer. Even if her grandfather praised Ling Taihan, in Murong Mingyan's eyes, how could Ling Taihan, who was dressed in plain clothes and looked ordinary, compare to the elegant young Master Qingchen? If Yili was here, she would definitely scoff at Murong Mingyan's taste. It wasn't that Yili thought Ling Taihan was better than Su Qingchen, but the two were completely different types. Although Ling Taihan wasn't as handsome as Su Qingchen, Mo Xiaoyao, Feng San, and Han Mingxi, he was tall and straight. His appearance was also firm and handsome. Even if he was put together with these world-famous handsome people, he would definitely not be drowned out. Moreover, on the surface, everyone thought that Su Qingchen's temper was better than Ling Taihan's. However, if Yili were to say, she was afraid that Ling Taihan's heart was softer than Su Qingchen's. If Yili were to choose one of these two to be her husband, Yili would most likely choose Ling Taihan and not Su Qingchen. This also explained why young Master Qingchen's appearance and wisdom were unparalleled in the world, but he still hadn't married. Sometimes, too much gentleness was actually a kind of alienation and indifference. Unfortunately, Murong Mingyan didn't understand this truth. Murong Xiong coldly snorted and said, "This old man knows what little girl is thinking. You just think that Ling Taihan is much older than you and his appearance isn't as handsome as many of the young masters who came to participate in the martial arts convention. It seems that Murong family has spoiled you too much. How good do you think your appearance is? Tonight, you went to see that brat from the Su family, right? Were you rejected? Your appearance may be called a beauty in Enching, but to Chu State isn't Xiling. That brat from the Su family has traveled the world, what kind of beauty hasn't he seen? With your appearance, if you stand next to that brat from the Su family, I'm afraid you're not as good looking as him. You don't have to resent Ling Taihan for being older than you. At 40 years old, he can maintain the appearance of a 30-year-old. At 70 years old, he can also maintain the appearance of a 40 or 50-year-old. Do you think you'll still be a beauty at 50 years old? At that time, it'll be him who dislikes you. If you marry that brat from the Su family or Mo Xiaoyao, I'm afraid you'll be left behind before you're 30 years old. Great-granduncle. These words could be said to be vicious. Murong Mingyan had never been humiliated like this in her entire life. This humiliation was personally given by her own family. Tears immediately flowed out and couldn't be stopped no matter how much she wiped them away. Cough. Uncle. Master Murong coughed lightly. He also felt that Murong Xiong had gone too far. Although Murong Mingyan's appearance hadn't reached the point of being unparalleled in the world, it wasn't to the point of being disliked. The title of the #1 beauty in Enching wasn't self-proclaimed. Although Master Murong wanted to attack Mingyan so that she wouldn't be too ignorant, there were some things that went too far. Murong Xiong glanced at Murong Mingyan, but didn't say anything in the end. Master Murong looked at Murong Mingyan and said, "In short, your great-granduncle and I have already decided on this matter. There's no need to say anything more." How could Murong Mingyan be willing to accept this? She steeled her heart and knelt in front of Master Murong. "Grandfather, Mingyan has a better idea. Pavilion Master Ling might not be the best choice." Master Murong raised his gray eyebrows. It wasn't that he looked down on Murong Mingyan, but he was very clear about his granddaughter's capabilities. Naturally, he didn't believe that Murong Mingyan had any good ideas. Murong Mingyan quickly said, "Young Master Qinchin." Master Murong's expression changed, and he said angrily, "I've said so much to you, but you're still stubborn. In the end, you just can't bear to part with Su Qinchin's face. You still dare to say it in such a dignified manner. Don't forget who was the one who lived a life of luxury with you all these years." Murong Mingyan looked at Master Murong with tears in her eyes. Murong Xiong frowned and raised his hand to stop his nephew from shouting. He stared at Murong Mingyan and said, "Tell me about it." Murong Mingyan was overjoyed and quickly said, "Young Master Qinchin's wisdom is unparalleled. If we can make him agree to marry into the Murong family." Chapter 546. Master Murong snorted and sneered, "Marry into the family. Don't you know what kind of family the Su family is? It's already hard enough for him to agree to marry you, but you still want to marry into the family." Master Murong was also unhappy when he said this. There was nothing more disgusting than having someone who was proud of his family admit that he was inferior to others. However, in the eyes of the world, even if the Su family was poor, their status was much higher than the Murong family. The so-called scholarly family, humph. Murong Mingyan thought of Su Qinchin's ruthlessness and her beautiful eyes couldn't help but dim. She continued, "Great-granduncle and grandfather are very resourceful, so they must have a way. If young Master Qinchin can become a member of the Murong family, we don't need to get involved with the assassin organization because of his relationship with Princess Ding. The Emperor of Xiling won't dare to touch the Murong family easily. Moreover, with young Master Qinchin's help, the Murong family will rise to a higher level." Master Murong hesitated when he heard this. It would be best if the Murong family could rise to a higher level. Once Su Qinchin married into the Murong family and the Su family would be relatives. Most importantly, the next generation of the Murong family would be the son of the famous young Master Qinchin. At that time, who would dare to say that the descendants of the Murong family were businessmen who reeked of money? However, the Su family had always been indifferent. How could they agree to such a proposal? Master Murong looked at Murong Xiong and hesitated for a moment before saying, "If so, Su Qinchin is indeed more suitable than Ling Taihan. After all, Ling Taihan is the head of the assassins. I'm afraid it won't be easy to control him. But this matter, I'm afraid it won't be easy." Murong Xiong narrowed his eyes and pondered. His eyes emitted a sharp light. He said proudly, "What's not easy about it? It's his blessing that I, Murong Xiong, am willing to marry my great niece." It wasn't because Murong Mingyan was good enough for Su Qinchin, but because Murong Mingyan was his great niece. As the #1 expert in the world, he was confident that Su Qinchin would not refuse this proposal. Master Murong looked at Murong Mingyan, who was kneeling on the ground with eyes full of expectation, and then looked at Murong Xiong, who was full of confidence. In the end, he agreed. It could be said that they had come to the martial arts tournament in high spirits, but they had returned in disappointment. On the second day of the martial arts competition, half of the top 10 experts had died before the third day of the competition. As for how they died, everyone was well aware. After all, everyone wants to be the son-in-law of the richest man in the world, but the Murong family only has one daughter. Naturally, he had to reduce his enemies as much as possible. Therefore, when the competition started and only half of the original top 10 experts appeared, no one felt the slightest bit surprised. Genom of Gojosian turned to look at Ling Taihan, who was resting with his eyes closed, and asked with a smile, "Pavilion Master Ling, are you interested in testing your skills on stage this year?" Although his face was calm as usual, Genom of Gojosian was very cautious of Ling Taihan in his heart. In this meeting, he could not see through Ling Taihan's depth. In other words, even if Ling Taihan was not stronger than him, he was definitely not weaker than him. However, Ling Taihan was 10 years younger than him. Thinking about Mo Xiuyao, who was 7 or 8 years younger than Ling Taihan, Genom of Gojosian suddenly felt a trace of exhaustion and helplessness. Compared to Mo Xiuyao, he was already old. The one who should have competed with Mo Xiuyao was his son, but unfortunately, his son was far from being able to compare to Mo Liufang's son. Turning around to look at Lei Dingfeng, who was sitting behind him, Genom of Gojosian began to reflect on whether he had arranged things too well for Dingfeng, to the point where he was inferior to Mo Xiuyao in every aspect. Perhaps, when he goes back, he should let him take charge. Ling Taihan opened his eyes and said indifferently, "Not interested." "Genom of Gojosian, Crown Prince Genom of Gojosian, are you not going to try?" Among these so-called rookies, other than the youth called Ren Qining, who was somewhat interesting, the others were simply not worthy of Ling Taihan's attention. Ling Taihan, who had just fought with Mo Xiuyao, had no interest in fighting with the younger generation. Moreover, there were stronger opponents in City right now. Ling Taihan lowered his eyes and looked at his right hand resting on the armrest. Then, he casually turned his gaze to the magnificent Murong family villa not far away. Genom of Gojosian laughed loudly. Dingfeng's insignificant martial arts is not good enough for him to compete on the stage. He is also not a person of Jianghu, so there is no need for him to care about this little dispute. The last sentence was directed at Lei Dingfeng. In any case, it was impossible for the Murong family to marry their daughter to the Jinan Wang's residence. Lei Dingfeng's participation in the martial arts competition was meaningless. "Father is right." Lei Dingfeng nodded in agreement. Genom of Gojosian nodded in satisfaction. He looked at his son with gratification and said, "When we return to the capital, Dingfeng will lead the troops to the south." Hearing this, Lei Dingfeng was indescribably surprised. He knew his father's intention to use the troops. Asking him to lead the troops to the south at this time was giving him permission to lead the troops alone. As long as he led the troops properly, he could have his own military power. Seeing that he understood his meaning, Genom of Gojosian patted him on the shoulder and said, "You are not young anymore. It is time for you to take charge. Father is also old. Father is at the peak of his life. This child thanks father." Lei Dingfeng said. Genom of Gojosian and his son said this without any intention of hiding it from others. Even Su Qingchen, who was dozing off to the side, did not seem to care. This was originally Genom of Gojosian's test of Su Qingchen. Young Master Qingchen was famous throughout the world, but many things could not be done with talent alone. He also needed to be decisive and ruthless. The terrain at the border between Nanzhao and Xiling was complicated. It was impossible to end the battle quickly. Thus, from the start, Genom of Gojosian had the idea of attacking Nanzhao first. He had not planned on a quick sneak attack. Thus, keeping it a secret was not so important. Or rather, if he could test Su Qingchen's true depths, even if he leaked a bit of military intelligence, Genom of Gojosian would feel it was worth it. If Su Qingchen chose to save Nanzhao, it meant that this person was soft-hearted and did not need to be feared. If Su Qingchen chose to stand by and watch, there was also no need to be too worried. If Su Qingchen used Nanzhao and Shi Ling to restrict each other, or even do something else, then, other than Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li in the northwest, there would be one more person to be wary of. Su Qingchen did not pretend not to hear, nor did he deliberately care about this topic. It was as if Genom of Gojoseon and his son were talking about ordinary family matters, as if the father was praising the son. He opened his eyes and looked at Lei Tingfeng. He smiled faintly and said, "Congratulations, Lei Tingfeng." Lei Tingfeng smiled and said, "Many thanks, young Master Qingchen." But the smile did not reach his eyes. Lei Tingfeng's life was actually quite sullen. Although his abilities and methods were not bad, the pressure from above was Genom of Gojoseon. There was no room for him to show off. If he did well, like father, like son. If he did wrong, he would be a bad bamboo shoot. In terms of ability, and experience, even if he was not as good as Mo Xiaoyao, he would not lose to Yelu Hong, Yelu Yi, Mo Jingqi, Mo Jingli, and the others. But when he mentioned others, the only impression they would have of him was Genom of Gojoseon. Lowering his head, Lei Tingfeng's eyes flashed with determination. He would let the world know what it meant to be the student surpassing the master. This one greets young Master Qingchen. While Su Qingchen and the other two were chatting, a middle-aged man who looked like a servant of the Murong family came over and greeted Su Qingchen. Su Qingchen sat up and nodded with a smile. No need to be so polite. The man looked at Su Qingchen with flattery and fawning eyes. He smiled and said, "Not at all. Our master and master invited you to the manor for a chat." This morning, Murong Xiong and the Murong family head did not appear on the stage. Although everyone was surprised, they did not say anything. Originally, the martial arts convention did not involve anyone. This time, the Murong family had done enough to organize it. The people present were not ordinary people. Naturally, they could see that the man's attitude towards Su Qingchen was different. Su Qingchen frowned slightly and said, "Does the Murong family head have something to say?" The man smiled apologetically and said, "The family head naturally has something important to discuss with young Master Qingchen." Su Qingchen nodded and stood up. "If so, please lead the way." Ling Taihan, who was sitting on the side, also stood up and said with a smile, "This one has admired the Murong family for a long time. Would it be possible for me to visit this?" The man was in a bit of a dilemma. The master and the old master definitely didn't want Ling Taihan to pay them a visit now, but Ling Taihan was the head of the assassins in the King of Hell's pavilion. How could he resist his majesty? Ling Taihan did not make things difficult for him. He smiled generously and said, "There's no need to make things difficult. It's just that this pavilion master has a good relationship with Prince Ding and Princess Consort. I have also promised Prince Ding that I would take good care of young Master Qingchen. Since it is not convenient for me to go, I can only ask the Murong family head to come out and chat with young Master Qingchen." This was not embarrassing. The man's face turned green. He forced a smile and said, "Young Master Qingchen, you are a guest. The Murong family will guarantee your safety." Wasn't the first person to make a move on young Master Qingchen at the martial arts convention from the Murong family? Leng Luyue, who was sitting behind Ling Taihan, said coldly. "In that case, Pavilion Master Ling, please come out." The man gritted his teeth and said. The order he received was to invite young Master Qingchen. If he did not invite him, the master would usually deal with the incompetent person first before asking for the reason. Watching the group leave, Lei Tingfeng frowned and said, "Father, is the Murong family planning to?" Genom of Gojoseon sneered and his eyes were fierce. "That old man Murong Xiong wants to die. I will help him." However, she saw that Su Qingchen was calmly staring at the teacup in front of him. He did not even look at her. She couldn't help but feel stifled in her heart. A little grievance welled up in her heart, and the rims of her eyes immediately turned red. Ling Taihan, who was sitting on the side, raised his eyebrows and glanced at Su Qingchen with a mocking smile. He looked as if he was watching a good show. Su Qingchen was not in a good mood at the moment. The reason was that Mo Xiaoyao had guessed the Murong family's plan. When he thought about how Mo Xiaoyao, that vile bastard, would laugh at him later, young Master Su's mood would not be good. The Murong family's master, who was full of confidence in a smile, so that Su Qingchen did not answer for a long time. The smile on his face gradually disappeared. After a while, Su Qingchen said faintly, "Thank you for your kindness, Master Murong. However, I don't have any intention of getting married. I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint you." The Murong family's master forced a smile and said, "As the saying goes, take care of the family, rule the country, and bring peace to the world. Young master, you've passed the new year and have yet to settle down. You should think about it carefully." Su Qingchen smiled faintly and said, "You're right, Master Zhuang. I've been working hard these past few years to cultivate my body. Unfortunately, my aptitude is too low and I haven't achieved anything." Ling Taihan could not help but secretly laugh when he heard this. However, his martial arts cultivation was profound and his endurance was enough. He forced himself to suppress his laughter. Master Murong had said that he would govern the country and bring peace to the world. Su Qingchen had taken that out of context. Ancient people said that cultivating one's body would govern the country and bring peace to the world. Young Master Su was still working hard on cultivating his body. He did not have the time to govern the family. This kind of rejection was obvious enough, especially in front of Ling Taihan. It could be said that he had cut off the possibility of the Murong family choosing another path. Master Murong's face darkened. He said coldly, "If that's the case, why did young Master Qingchen stay alone with Mingyu last night? Could it be that young Master Su is well educated and does not know that men and women should not touch each other? Do you not know the importance of a girl's reputation? Could it be that young Master Qingchen does not intend to give the Murong family an explanation?" Explanation. Su Qingchen frowned and looked at Master Murong and Murong Mingyan in confusion. The confusion and doubt in her calm eyes almost made the two people unable to maintain the expression on their faces. Su Qingchen said, "Young Lady Murong came to visit last night. Originally, I wanted to talk at the door, but young Lady Murong insisted on talking with me alone. Or did Master Murong think that it would be better for us to be in a deadlock at the door and be seen by passers-by? In addition, even if we talked in private, Master Murong must know my identity. I can guarantee that there were no less than 4 people in the room at that time. Moreover, I did not touch young Lady Murong's finger." Murong Mingyan was ashamed and ashamed. She said with tears in her eyes, "Young Master Qingchen, is Mingyan really not worthy of your attention?" Su Qingchen frowned and said indifferently, "I'm sorry." At this point, it was already a deadlock. Ling Taihan thought about whether he should say something or not. No matter what, it was important for him to get Su Qingchen out of the Murong family in one piece. He did not care about other people, but he was afraid that the old monster Murong Xiong would suddenly make a move. If that happened, they would be in danger today. Master Murong's face darkened. He stared at Su Qingchen and said, "Young Master Qingchen, even if you don't think for yourself, you should think for Prince Ding and Princess Ding, right?" Su Qingchen raised her eyebrows. "Master Murong, please forgive me for not understanding your words." Master Murong sneered, "Not only does my Murong family own 60% of Xiling country's business, we also have a lot of business in Dechu State and Li City in the northwest. Speaking of which, the Northwest's iron mines are all bought from Dechu State and Xiling, right?" Coincidentally, 70% of the iron mines I buy in Li City are bought from Xiling from the Murong family. For a normal family, they might not use much iron in their lifetime. But for the Prince Ding mansion, which had nearly 1 million soldiers, they would not have weapons without iron mines. Therefore, iron mines were a very important issue for the Northwest. The Murong family was rich, so how could they not see such a huge benefit? As early as when the Northwest and Dechu state had just broken off relations, the Murong family had already taken the initiative to contact the Prince Ding mansion. Su Qingchen lowered his eyes and did not speak. If Master Murong could see him, he would definitely see the sneer and coldness in his cold eyes. Unfortunately, Master Murong did not see it, so he took Su Qingchen's silence as a compromise. He nodded proudly and laughed. Young Master Qingchen, why don't you think about it carefully? Although my Murong family is a merchant family, our wealth is comparable to that of a country. After marrying into the Murong family, young Master Qingchen will be the next master. Isn't it 1,000 times better than being Prince Ding's assistant? Cough cough. With such shocking words, even Pavilion Master Ling, who was as calm as a mountain, almost choked on his tea. Ling Taihan looked at Master Murong with admiration. You want Su Qingchen to marry into the family? You really dare to dream. If Su Qingchen does not destroy your Murong family, I will compensate you with the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce. Ling Taihan and Su Qingchen had known each other for a long time. Although they did not meet often, it did not prevent him from understanding Su Qingchen. Because this was the experience he gained from personal experience. Lei Jinting will come and find us himself. Leaving these words behind, young Master Qingchen flew away. Only Ling Taihan was left behind. He shook his head and sighed helplessly. It seems like the Murong family's fate is already at its end. Otherwise, how could they have offended this god? Prince Genom of Gojosian looked at the competition on the stage with a solemn expression. Lei Dingfeng, who was sitting behind him, knew that his father's thoughts were no longer on the stage. How is it? Genom of Gojosian asked the gold-robed guard in front of him. The gold-robed guard said in a low voice, I just received news that the Murong family wants young Master Qingchen to marry into their family. Genom of Gojosian was startled, but he soon sneered, they're dreaming. What was Su Qingchen's reaction? The gold-robed guard said, young Master Qingchen didn't seem to agree. When he left just now, young Master Qingchen didn't look too good. At this time, he has already returned to the city. Genom of Gojosian lowered his head and pondered for a long time. Lei Dingfeng said in a low voice, Su Qingchen became famous at such a young age and was born into a scholarly family. He must be proud and arrogant. It would be difficult for him to agree to such a proposal. Genom of Gojosian frowned. He turned to look at Lei Dingfeng and asked, Dingfeng, if you were Su Qingchen, would you agree? Lei Dingfeng thought for a moment, then nodded honestly and said, in reply to Imperial Father, I would agree. Genom of Gojosian nodded and smiled, what you said is the truth. Let's go back to the city. Standing up, Genom of Gojosian turned and walked out of the arena. Lei Dingfeng naturally followed immediately. Lang Luyue, who was sitting to the side, saw the two people leave. She then looked at the seats in the front row that were mostly empty. She thought for a moment and said, third brother, let's go too. Sickly scholar naturally wouldn't refute Lang Luyue's words. He nodded and also stood up to leave. Rin Qining, who was currently sparring in the arena, glanced at the empty seats below from the corner of his eye. A cold light flashed in his eyes and he flipped his sword to send his opponent off the arena. Standing on the arena, Rin Qining looked at the Murong family not far away from the arena. Su Qingchen bid farewell to Ling Taihan and walked around the city before returning to the inn that he was temporarily staying at. As soon as he entered the room, he saw two people sitting in the room. Before Su Qingchen could say anything, a few shadow guards pounced at him. Genom of Gojosian naturally didn't care about these shadow guards. With a cold laugh, he put down his teacup and casually struck out with his palm. The shadow guards clearly realized that they were not this person's opponent. Their figures intertwined, and in the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint, two of them entangled the Jinan Wang, while the other two pounced towards Lei Dingfeng. At the same time, two more people appeared behind Su Qingchen and stood in front of her. Stop! Su Qingchen opened his mouth to stop them. Before he finished speaking, the shadow guards had already stopped their attacks and retreated to the side with their bodies bowed. Genom of Gojosian clapped his hands and laughed, good, as expected of the Prince Ding Mansion's shadow guard. You really live up to your reputation. Young Master Qingchen, I hope that you will forgive me for taking the liberty of visiting. Su Qingchen walked out from behind the shadow guards and waved his hand, saying, You may leave. Genom of Gojosian has no ill intentions. Your subordinates will take their leave. The shadow guards didn't delay and left after confirming Su Qingchen's words. Genom of Gojosian raised his eyebrows and couldn't help but look at this gentle and graceful young Master Qingchen in a new light. Oh? How can young Master Qingchen be so sure that I have no ill intentions? Su Qingchen laughed. If Genom of Gojosian wanted to ambush me, you could have done it anywhere. Why wait in the inn? Genom of Gojosian nodded and said, That's right. I really envy Prince Ding. Not only does he have a wise person like young Master Qingchen to assist him, but his subordinates are also well trained. Originally, I wanted to sneak in quietly, but I didn't expect to be discovered. What's more, they were actually able to keep their composure. Su Qingchen walked over to Genom of Gojosian and sat down. He took a celadon teacup and poured himself a cup of tea. He smiled and said, Prince Ding, you flatter me. Su Qingchen smiled and looked at Genom of Gojosian and said, I know why Genom of Gojosian is here. I have no interest in selling myself to anyone. Genom of Gojosian smiled strangely. The Murong family's wealth is comparable to that of a country. Su Qingchen smiled indifferently. Wealth comparable to that of a country is only useful if one knows how to use it. If a person only needs 100,000 taels to live the most extravagant life, then, what's the point of 1,000,000 taels to him? When silver reaches a certain level, it's just a number. The South Protecting King narrowed his eyes and sized up Su Qingchen. I don't understand what you mean. Su Qingchen smiled and said, With my current status, I am very short on money. Even 1,000,000 or 10,000,000 wouldn't be too much. But with a different status, 8 or 10,000 would be enough. Genom of Gojosian's eyes flashed and he cupped his hands. Young master is very talented. If I can't have someone like you to assist me, I will regret it for the rest of my life. Prince Ding is very fortunate. Su Qingchen's words were easy to understand. He was now an important person in the Northwest and was in charge of the Northwest's government. Naturally, the more money he had, the better. But young Master Qingchen had no interest in money. Genom of Gojosian looked at him and said, Young Master Qingchen doesn't seem surprised by Ai's visit. Or perhaps young Master Qingchen has been waiting for Ai to come. Su Qingchen smiled faintly and said, I just said a few words to Pavilion Master Ling. In this world, there are no eternal friends, nor are there eternal enemies. Now, I'll add, there are only eternal benefits. At least for now, you and I have the same goal, right? Or, does Genom of Gojosian think that I don't have the ability to control the Murong family? There are no eternal friends, nor are there eternal enemies, only eternal benefits. Insightful. Genom of Gojosian praised. I'm just copying the wisdom of others. I just happened to hear the princess mention it and felt that it was appropriate. Isn't that right? Su Qingchen asked as he drank his tea. Princess Consort Ding. Ah. Princess Consort Ding is indeed a rare woman. Since young Master Qingchen has the confidence to control the Murong family, why do you want to cooperate with I? Genom of Gojoseon asked. A waste of time, Su Qingchen said bluntly. Of course, he could take over the Murong family, but it would take 10 days to half a month. It wouldn't be easy to accomplish in 3 to 5 years. But now, if Mo Xiaoyao let Su Qingchen go for so long for the Murong family, he would rather burn down all of the Murong family's properties. If Su Qingchen left, who would take care of his official business and the people's livelihood? Genom of Gojoseon lowered his eyes and thought about Su Qingchen's words. If he could, he would never cooperate with Su Qingchen. Cooperation meant that he couldn't enjoy the benefits alone. Most of the Murong family's benefits were in Xiling and belonged to Xiling. But if he didn't agree, Genom of Gojoseon didn't doubt that Su Qingchen would find a way to sabotage him even if he didn't want to marry into the Murong family. Besides, there was still the Dechu state. If he forced the Murong family to submit to the Dechu state, the losses would outweigh the gains. After a long time, Genom of Gojoseon raised his head and asked, "What do you want, young Master Qingchen?" Su Qingchen smiled in satisfaction. All of the Murong family's properties in the northwest will belong to the Prince Ding mansion. As for those in Xiling, I don't want much. 30% will belong to the Prince Ding mansion and 1% to the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce. Genom of Gojoseon's face darkened. Young Master Qingchen's appetite is a little too big. He asked for 40% of the Murong family's properties. That was equivalent to 20% of the Xiling's properties. Su Qingchen smiled faintly. Genom of Gojoseon means that Jinan Palace can take down the Murong family alone. Chapter 549. Does Genom of Gojoseon have the confidence to deal with Murong Xiong? Su Qingchen's words were understated, but in Genom of Gojoseon's ears, it had a completely different meaning. Jianghu's experts seemed unable to affect the overall situation, but experts at Murong Xiong's level couldn't help but make people wary. No matter how much he had the upper hand, if he were to fight to the death, even if he had to risk his life to take your life, there were not many people in this world who would be able to resist him. The higher one's position, the more they cherished their lives. Genom of Gojoseon naturally didn't want to let go of such a huge threat to himself. He wanted to unify the world and destroy Mo Liufang's descendants, but if he died at the hands of someone from Jianghu, then he would have nothing left. Young Master Qingchen persuaded Ling Taihan to act. That's right, Ling Taihan has a good relationship with young Master Qingchen and Prince Ding. Genom of Gojoseon said in a deep voice. Su Qingchen smiled faintly and said, "Friendship is friendship, business is business. I won't hide it from Prince. This time, I only came on the way from Nanzhao. I didn't bring many people from the northwest. However, if I can persuade Pavilion Master Ling to act, then I can also persuade the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce to follow my orders. This time, I'm afraid that the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce will have to contribute the most. Prince Ding giving up 10% of the profits isn't too much." Genom of Gojoseon had nothing to say. The 10% profit that Su Qingchen spoke of was 100,000 or even 1,000,000 taels of silver for him. Looking at the smiling young master in white sitting in front of him, Genom of Gojoseon once again felt something stuck in his chest. He couldn't spit it out or swallow it. I don't understand why young Master Qingchen wants to act against the Murong family. Speaking of which, the existence of the Murong family isn't without benefits for the Northwest, right? Genom of Gojoseon asked. As long as the Murong family existed, the Northwest's economy would never catch up to the Dechu state. Compared to the hundreds of families contending in the Dechu state, the Murong family of West Hill had been the dominant family for too long. Su Qingchen took a sip of tea and sighed softly. I did think of cooperating with the Murong family. Unfortunately, some people are too ignorant. Now that the Murong family is able to become a hidden danger in Xiling, it may not be impossible for them to become a hidden danger in Ding Wangfu in the future. Jinan Wang was silent for a while before he respectfully said, I understand. I will do as young Master Qingchen said. If there's anything you need me to do, young Master Qingchen can just send someone to inform Tingfeng. Lei Tingfeng understood that his father wanted him to take care of this matter. If Genom of Gojoseon thought that everything would go smoothly without the Murong family, and that the politics and people would be harmonious, it could only mean that he himself had never studied the economy. It seemed that occasionally listening to Li Er's chatter was quite beneficial. At least sometimes, she raised some points that even someone as intelligent and far-sighted as young Master Qingchen had never thought of. Thinking of the woman who once spoke with assurance in the study, her face full of confidence and joy, Su Qingchen's face revealed a faint smile. Ling Taihan was silent for a long time before he sighed. I thought you were scheming against the Murong family. Now it seems that you're scheming against Lei Jinting. That's right, even though the Murong family was known as the richest family, but no one had ever clearly calculated how much wealth Ding Wangfu had. Even if it wasn't as good as the Murong family, it could still raise hundreds of thousands of Mahist army under the suppression of the Dechu state's royal family for generations. With this kind of background, it was likely that they didn't really care about the Murong family's gold and silver. Encountering such an opponent, Lei Jinting could only admit that he was unlucky. You people think too much in your brains. I'm too lazy to think about these things. When you're about to make a move, just send someone to inform me. Ling Taihan said in a low voice. All his life, he pursued the pinnacle of martial arts. He had no interest in Jianghu or the imperial court. Even if it was the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce, it was more of a responsibility. Therefore, he naturally didn't have much interest in Su Qingchen's roundabout matters that made his head hurt just by listening to her. Su Qingchen smiled and agreed. She watched Ling Taihan leave through the window, and the room returned to silence. Since that day when Su Qingchen left the Murong family, she didn't reply to any news from the Murong family. The rankings for the new round of the martial arts convention were also released. However, this time, it was clearly a bit awkward. There was no other reason. One of the 4 great masters from the previous 2 tournaments was still alive. Although only 2 of them attended the martial arts convention, they didn't fight. Therefore, this year's young masters couldn't directly occupy the title of number 1 great master. In the end, the martial arts convention, which was originally highly publicized, ended in a somewhat hasty manner. A few days ago, the Murong family was still patiently waiting for Su Qingchen's reply. Moreover, after the martial arts convention, Su Qingchen didn't leave in city. It was normal for young Master Qingchen to take some time to consider something as important as marrying into the family. However, the Murong family gradually realized that something was wrong. Chapter 550. There was still no movement in places further away, but news came from places closer to in city that businesses were starting to have problems. Not only was there interference from the Emperor Xiling, but there was also the shadow of the Dechu state or the Prince Ding mansion. Master Murong thought of the white-clothed figure with a calm smile in the hall of the Murong family, and his face became more and more unsightly. This was just the beginning. When the Murong family found out that their businesses in Great Chu, Nanzhao, and the Northwest all had problems at the same time, and their shops were either closed down or forced to close. Some of them were even directly confiscated. Only then did the Murong family's head truly understand how powerful that elegant and otherworldly man was. Bastard! Is that Su boy crazy? In the study of the Murong family, Murong Xiong was furious as he read the news reported by his nephew. Murong Mingyan stood behind her grandfather, and her face was covered in tears. She never thought that Su Qingchen would attack the Murong family in order to not marry her. Murong Xiong said angrily, "Pass down the order. I want the Prince Ding mansion to not be able to buy a single iron mine in the northwest." Master Murong smiled bitterly and said, "I just received news that there are iron mines in the northwest, and the Prince Ding mansion is not only doing business with the surrounding countries, but also with the countries of the west. The Martial Arts Society convention hasn't even started, and the Northwest has already attacked our shops. I'm afraid Su Boy didn't come with good intentions this time." Murong Xiong was so angry that he gasped for breath. "How much did the Murong family lose?" Master Murong said, "All our businesses outside the West Hill are gone." The Murong family's foundation was in the West Hill. Although they had businesses in other places, they weren't enough to really affect the other party's economy, so they didn't have to worry about attacking. He was afraid that when the Murong family's businesses collapsed, the merchants in their own country would celebrate. The West Hill also suffered heavy losses. Not only did the Genom of Gojoseon and the officials suppress us, but many merchants among the people also began to attack us. The Murong family monopolized more than half of the businesses in the West Hill, so they naturally had countless enemies. Murong Xiong sneered and said, "Since they want to fight with us, there's no harm in letting them see how deep the Murong family's wealth is. How could the Murong family's wealth be limited to the shops outside? Even the gold and silver accumulated over hundreds of years was enough to crush those who went against them." The Murong family's master said hesitantly, "Uncle, I'm afraid that this isn't appropriate. Wouldn't that give Genom of Gojoseon a legitimate reason to interfere? If the conflict between the merchants was too serious and affected the common people, Genom of Gojoseon could directly order his army to wipe out the Murong family and no one would say anything." Murong Xiong could not help but frown. He had been practicing martial arts since he was a child. He was not proficient in politics or business. While the two of them were frowning and thinking hard, a servant came in from outside and reporting to Master, "There is a young Master Renqining outside asking for an audience." Master Murong frowned and said, "Renqining? Who is that?" Murong Xiong had some impression of him and said, "The one who won first place in the martial arts competition. Unfortunately, he is too young. If he was 10 years older, he might be able to surpass Ling Taihan and Lei Zhenting." The Murong family's master had no interest in Renqining's martial arts. Even if Murong Xiong's cultivation was profound, he was helpless in the face of the Murong family's current deadlock. "What does he want?" The servant reported. Young Master Ren said that he can resolve the current deadlock for Master. The Murong family's master was startled and turned to look at Murong Xiong. Murong Xiong's old eyes slightly narrowed and said, "Let him in." Not far from the Murong family's residence, two people were sitting leisurely on a lush tree branch and looking at the Murong family's gate. "Li, what do you think Renqining wants to do by coming to the Murong family at this time?" Mo Xiaoyao asked curiously. Yili shook her head. She wasn't an immortal, how could she know so clearly? Mo Xiaoyao sighed and said, "We clearly said that we would come out to play, but why do I feel more tired than usual?" Yili leaned on his chest and said with a smile, "Isn't that the one who doesn't know martial arts? Although he has the shadow guard to protect him, you also know how powerful that Murong Xiong is. If he suddenly turns hostile, what's the use of Big Brother's intelligence? If Su Qingchen and Murong Xiong came face to face and made up their minds to kill him, even if Su Qingchen was the smartest person in the world, it would still be a waste. In the face of absolute strength, any scheme would be useless." Mo Xiaoyao sighed and lowered his head to look at Yili. "Li is right. Now that Renqining is also involved, we really can't leave." Genom of Gojoseon and Ling Taihan teamed up to deal with Murong Xiong, but they only had a 50% chance of winning. If Renqining was added in, it would be hard to say what would happen. Mo Xiaoyao didn't care about the others or the Murong family, but at least they had to ensure Su Qingchen's safety. I'll go in and take a look. Yili pulled Mo Xiaoyao back and said, Murong Xiong's martial arts are much higher than yours. It's better if you don't take the risk. Mo Xiaoyao smiled and looked at her. He reached out and gently brushed her hair behind her ear and said with a smile, Don't worry. Even if I'm discovered, I can't beat them. Can't I run? Yili frowned and stared at him, Be careful. Mo Xiaoyao nodded and let go of Yili. He silently bypassed the large number of guards in front of the door and went into the Murong family. At this time in the study, Ren Qining was looking at the three people in front of him with a smile. He was leisurely fanning himself with the fan in his hand. In the end, who are you and why have you come? Murong family's head coldly looked at the gentle and scholarly-looking man in front of him. He was very clear that this person was different from young Master Qing Qin. This person's martial arts were ranked first in Jianghu. Ren Qining smiled and said, My surname is Ren Qining. Greetings to Murong family's head and senior Murong. Murong Xiong coldly snorted. Ren Qining suddenly felt his heart tremble. His blood rushed to his head and he almost fell to the ground. While his heart was amazed by Murong Xiong's profound internal energy, Ren Qining's face was calm. He smiled and praised, Senior Murong is really a senior expert. This junior admires you. Murong Xiong sneered. How could he not hear that Ren Qining was reminding him not to use his martial arts to bully the younger generation? Young Master Ren, you didn't come to the Murong family to praise this old man. Ren Qining smiled and glanced at Murong Mingyan. He smiled and said, To be honest, I came to ask for Miss Murong's hand in marriage. Ask for her hand in marriage. The three people in the study were stunned. Murong Xiong was the first to react. He sneered, Why do you think this old man will marry Mingyan to you? Ren Qining casually tapped his palm with the fan and slowly said, Now, besides me, is there anyone else who is willing to marry Miss Murong? Impudent! Murong Xiong angrily shouted. Ren Qining was not afraid at all. He smiled and said, Senior Murong, please don't be angry. Although my words are unpleasant to hear, Senior Murong can't deny that this is the truth. The Murong family is big and powerful. Naturally, there are not many people who are qualified to marry Miss Murong. Senior Murong must have understood young Master Qingchen's attitude these days. Pavilion Master Ling is probably standing on young Master Qingchen's side. Or, does Master Murong plan to marry Miss Murong to the Dechu state? With Murong Mingyan's status, she would at most be an imperial concubine after entering the palace. Not to mention the imperial concubine and the empress. The Dechu state did not lack money. The importance of the Murong family in Emperor Chu's eyes was questionable. At that time, he was afraid that he would suffer a double loss. The Murong family would lose their only daughter and their entire family business. Do you think you are qualified to marry Mingyan? Murong Xiong stared at him and said coldly. Ren Qining smiled and said, Although I am not as rich as the Murong family, I still have some ability and family background. Murong Xiong snorted disdainfully. No matter in Jianghu, he had never heard of the name Ren Qining. There was no powerful family with the surname Ren. An unknown brat dared to be so arrogant. Ren Qining did not get angry when he saw Murong Xiong's contemptuous expression. He said with a smile, Senior Murong, how about you give me some pointers? Murong Xiong did not have time to ridicule Ren Qining for overestimating himself. He saw Ren Qining's sleeve move and a strong wind attack the Murong family's head. The Murong family's head did not practice martial arts. He was shocked by this sudden change and did not have time to dodge. Murong Mingyan, who was standing to the side, clenched her teeth and a dagger appeared in her hand. She stabbed it towards Rin Qining. Rin Qining smiled slightly. His fingers moved quickly and easily took the dagger from Murong Mingyin's hand. Although this move was exquisite, if young experts like Ling Taihan and Mo Xiuyao were present, they might not be able to see through it. However, Murong Xiong was different. He was already the world's #1 expert 50 years ago. The things he had seen were naturally much more than Mo Xiuyao and Ling Taihan. Murong Xiong's face changed. He stared at Rin Qining and said, "Fleeting finger. Who are you to the Lin family?" Rin Qining slightly bowed and said with a smile, "Junior's surname is Lin and given name is Yuan. My grandfather's surname is Lin and given name is Fuqin. Senior must have heard of it. You are Lin Yuan. This is impossible. Lin Yuan is not." The Murong family's business was spread all over the world. Naturally, their sources of information were also spread all over the world. Murong Xiong had already noticed Lin Yuan. It could even be said that he had noticed him earlier than Mo Xiuyao. However, the reason why he noticed Lin Yuan was different from Mo Xiuyao and the others. Mo Xiuyao and the rest of the world noticed Lin Yuan's identity as an orphan of the previous dynasty. Murong Xiong noticed him because he had a grandfather called Lin Fuqin. Lin Fuqin was a person who was rarely known in Jianghu. However, Murong Xiong remembered that he was a top expert like himself. It was just that Lin Fuqin had never really made a name for himself in Jianghu. Sometimes, Murong Xiong even doubted that if Lin Fuqin had fought for the title of top expert, he would not have been able to obtain the title of the world's #1 expert. Rin Qining's eyebrows flashed with a trace of disdain. Tanjiji. Just a plaything that can't be shown in public. What is he? Chapter 551. When Mo Xiuyao came out of the Murong family, Yili finally breathed a sigh of relief. The two left the Murong family. On the way, Mo Xiuyao's brows were tightly knitted. He was obviously troubled. "Xiuyao, what happened?" Yili asked softly. Mo Xiuyao frowned and told her what he heard in the Murong family. He didn't hear much because he was afraid of Murong Xiong and didn't dare to get too close. But Murong Xiong's words, "You are Lin Yuan," were heard clearly. Perhaps Murong Xiong was conceited that his martial arts were unparalleled in the world, so he didn't suppress his voice. Yili was also surprised by this result. Rin Qining is a descendant of the previous dynasty's imperial family. Could it be that he and Tanjiji are brothers? The two of them were close in age. The previous dynasty had been destroyed for 200 years. It would be strange if two orphans of the previous dynasty suddenly appeared at the same time. Mo Xiuyao shook his head. No, if they were brothers, they wouldn't both be called Lin Yuan. In addition, when Rin Qining talked about Tanjiji, his tone was full of disdain. If they were biological brothers, even if they were dissatisfied, they wouldn't use that kind of tone. Rin Qining's attitude was clearly degrading Tanjiji to the point that he was worse than a servant. It seems that we need to investigate this previous dynasty's imperial family. Yili smiled. Mo Xiuyao nodded in agreement. Let's go. We'll go back and tell your big brother about this. After hearing the news brought by Mo Xiuyao and Yili, young Master Qing Chen didn't panic. Seeing young Master Qing Chen's calm appearance, Prince Ding suddenly felt that he was meddling in other people's business. Yili looked at Su Qingchen worriedly. Big brother. Su Qingchen smiled. Don't worry. Rin Qining can't affect the overall situation. Mo Xiuyao hugged Yili and rested his chin on her shoulder. He smiled. Rin Qining is full of confidence. Young Master Qingchen is unwilling to marry Miss Murong, but isn't there a descendant of the royal family who is willing to marry her? Su Qingchen casually knocked on the edge of the table, the smile on her lips like a tranquil pear blossom. Does Ren Qining have the ability to directly face the threat of Shilin de Chu State and Yanwang Chamber of Commerce? Mo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows, clearly wanting to go against him. What if he does? Su Qingchen raised his eyelids and said indifferently, if he has the ability, he can just raise the banner of reviving the country. Why must you marry Murong Mingyan? Mo Xiuyao rubbed his nose helplessly. It was so boring talking to smart people. What do you think he'll do? Su Qingchen said, move the Murong family's businesses as soon as possible. Save as many as you can. Yili said, will Murong Xiong accept this result? Murong Xiong's temperament seemed to be that of an old man's. How could he accept this result? Even if the Murong family was saved, a few layers of skin would be scraped off. Su Qingchen said, Ren Qining isn't a god. If the Murong family doesn't want to be annihilated, they can only accept his proposal. This person. Although he's not a concern this time, Prince. We probably have to pay more attention to this person in the future. This one has a premonition that this person is 10 times, 100 times more troublesome than Tan Jiji. Mo Xiuyao had never really taken Tan Jiji seriously. Moreover, now that Princess Anxi had ascended the throne and Shu Manlin had been killed, Tan Jiji was probably hiding somewhere like a drowning dog. However, since even Su Qingchen had taken notice of this person, Mo Xiuyao naturally wouldn't make a small mistake. Mo Xiuyao lowered his eyebrows and thought for a while. He frowned and said, we've also sent people to investigate the Chu State, Xiling, and even Nanzhao. We couldn't find anything about this Ren Qining. It's as if this person appeared out of thin air. Since he's so confident that he can save the Murong family, he must have a lot of power under him. How could we not find anything? Yili thought for a while and said, if it's not that we didn't investigate thoroughly, then, he's not even in the territory we investigated. Mo Xiuyao was startled. Not in Chu State or Xiling. Could it be the northern tribes? No, the northern tribes are xenophobic by nature. Moreover, it's very difficult for people from the Central Plains to survive outside the pass. Then. There was a moment of silence in the room. The three of them looked at each other and said in unison, the Northeast. The northeast of Chu State was also called the Barbarian Land like the other borders. The people of the Central Plains called it the Northern Territory. Originally, many small tribes gathered there and fought among themselves. The Chu State had no interest in interfering, and the northern tribes had no ability to interfere. The terrain of the Northern Territory wasn't like the flat plains of the northern tribes. Instead, it was covered with mountains and forests. Ever since the Prince Ding mansion broke away from the Chu State, the various barbarian tribes in the Northern Territory seemed to have gradually united. They even began to encroach on the borders of the Chu State. If it was in the past, Mo Xiuyao would have already set his sights on that area. However, ever since he broke off all ties with the Chu State, Mo Xiuyao naturally paid more attention to the northwest and the borders of the surrounding countries. He didn't want to care about the Chu State anymore. Go investigate. Mo Xiuyao said in a low voice. Your subordinate obeys. Someone in the dark responded. Mo Xiuyao's face was gloomy. If Ren Qining dares to lead the barbarians into the pass, I want him to die without any descendants. Chapter 552. Su Qingchen. Outside the Murong family's gate, Murong Xiong and Master Murong stared at the fairy-like man in front of them. Murong Mingyan's eyes were filled with hidden bitterness. Su Qingchen smiled gently and politely. He looked at the people in front of him and cupped his hands. Senior Murong, Master Ren. Ren Qining's face was gloomy. He had secretly made a lot of arrangements these days, but he didn't expect Su Qingchen to act so quickly. He glanced at Jack Han Nam of Gojoseon and Ling Taihan standing next to Su Qingchen and smiled. Master Qingchen is indeed extraordinary. I heard that Pavilion Master Ling and Jack Han Nam of Gojoseon have some grudges. I didn't expect them to stand together today. It must be because of Master Qingchen. Su Qingchen smiled and said, the world is bustling for profit, and the world is bustling for profit. Master Ren, you must be joking. Su Qingchen was very straightforward. It was clear that they had their eyes on the Murong family's wealth. What are you going to do? Master Murong stepped forward and pointed at Su Qingchen. Master Qingchen, the Murong family has treated you well. Aren't you afraid of being punished by the heavens for doing this? Su Qingchen sighed helplessly. Master Murong, please forgive me. Although I have a deep relationship with the Prince Ding Mansion, there is no reason for me to sell my body for the Prince Ding Mansion. However, if the Northwest is in trouble because of this, it is my fault. Therefore, I have no choice. I hope Master Murong can forgive me. Master Murong was so angry that his chest heaved up and down. He looked like he was about to vomit blood. Ling Taihan and Lei Tingfeng couldn't help but lower their heads and laugh. They all knew the cause and effect of the matter. Su Qingchen's words were very gentle and pleasant to the ears, but in the ears of Ling Taihan and Lei Tingfeng, it was, I don't want to marry your granddaughter, but you insist that I marry her. If I don't marry you, I will stop the Northwest's business. I have no choice but to destroy your Murong family. How dare you? Murong Xiong roared and flew toward Su Qingchen, who was standing at the front. This time, Murong Xiong was originally full of confidence when he returned to Jianghu. With his reputation and martial arts, he should have been respected and obeyed by everyone. To be able to catch his eye and marry into the Murong family was naturally a great favor and charity, but he did not expect to meet Su Qingchen, who did not know how to appreciate favors. Now, not only had the marriage failed, even the Murong family was in imminent danger. Ling Taihan and Genim of Gojoseon's expressions changed. They both stepped in front of Su Qingchen and struck out with their palms. The shadow guard behind Su Qingchen had already pulled Su Qingchen back a dozen steps. The palms of the three people collided, and strong winds immediately spread out. The people standing around couldn't take it anymore and retreated. Ling Taihan and Genim of Gojoseon each took 2 steps back and looked at Murong Xiong, who had fallen to the ground. Ling Taihan sneered, Senior Murong's name has been known for decades. Is it considered skill to attack someone who doesn't know martial arts? The title of the world's #1 expert isn't just an empty title, is it? How dare you? Murong Xiong roared and did not hesitate to strike out at Ling Taihan. Ling Taihan did not know that his words had poked at Murong Xiong's sore spot. Although he had won the title of the world's #1 expert, he did not have the slightest confidence in defeating Ren Qining's grandfather, Lin Fuqin. It was just that Lin Fuqin did not fight with him and did not compete with him. Now that he heard Ling Taihan's words, it was as if he knew the truth of the past and could mock him. In fact, Murong Xiong was thinking too much. Even if Ling Taihan was ranked as one of the world's top 4 experts, he knew that there would always be someone stronger than him. In this Jianghu, there might not be no one stronger than him. The world's #1 expert was not to be trifled with. Even if Ling Taihan's martial arts had improved after his fight with Mo Xiaoyao a few days ago, he still had no chance of winning against Murong Xiong. Compared to Ling Taihan, who was being watched closely by Murong Xiong, Genim of Gojoseon was much more relaxed. He even had the time to ponder over Ling Taihan and Murong Xiong's martial arts moves. Lang Luyue and Sickly Scholar, who were watching from the side, saw that Ling Taihan was in a tough battle and could not help but feel anxious. Lang Luyue raised her sword and wanted to rush up to help. Su Qingchen, who was standing beside her, stopped her. Pavilion Master Lang, it's useless for you to go up now. In this kind of battle between experts, if one was not an expert of the same level, one would only be cannon fodder. Glancing at Genom of Gojosian who was watching from the side, Su Qingchen said in a clear voice, Prince, can you defeat Senior Murong by yourself? Genom of Gojosian was startled and his heart trembled. Only then did he rush up and join the battle between Ling Taihan and Murong Xiong. That's right, he had a grudge with Ling Taihan. If he could let Murong Xiong kill Ling Taihan and then kill Su Qingchen, that would be the best. But unfortunately, once Ling Taihan died, he would become Murong Xiong's next opponent. Since that was the case, he might as well get rid of the biggest threat first. The grudge between him and Ling Taihan wasn't something that happened in just 1 or 2 years. Wasn't everyone still living peacefully? With Genom of Gojosian joining the battle, Ling Taihan immediately let out a sigh of relief. The two of them working together to fight Murong Xiong was considered to be evenly matched. On the side, Ren Qining's expression was gloomy. He glanced at the people on the battlefield and also jumped into the battle. This time, without Su Qingchen's reminder, Ling Luiyue and Lei Tingfeng acted at the same time and restrained Ren Qining. As a result, all the important people present had already acted. Murong clan and Ren Qining's people also rushed out under the Murong clan's signal. The Yanwang Chamber of Commerce and Genom of Gojosian's gold-robed guards behind Su Qingchen also stepped forward. They didn't want to show any weakness and engaged in close combat. The Murong clan was instantly filled with blood. Why are you doing this to me? Murong Mingyan looked at the chaos in front of her and walked step by step towards Su Qingchen. Her martial arts weren't very strong, but she wasn't weak either. Along the way, the people on both sides didn't really attack her. She actually rushed to Su Qingchen just like that. Su Qingchen lowered his eyes and looked at her calmly. Miss Murong, this one said that you and I aren't suitable. Miss Murong shouldn't force me. Murong Mingyan said with tears in her eyes. So I forced you to marry me, and you destroyed my family. Qingchen. Young Master Qingchen, everyone says that young Master Qingchen is gentle and refined. It turns out that you're actually so ruthless. Su Qingchen smiled. I'm sorry to disappoint Miss Murong. Su Qingchen is not a deity. Moreover, who said that deities weren't heartless? People worship them, but who had ever seen a deity show mercy? If that's the case, then die. Murong Mingyan's expression changed and she said sternly. A cold light appeared in her hand, and a dagger stabbed towards Su Qingchen's chest. Su Qingchen's expression was calm. Even his gaze didn't change. He calmly watched as the dagger stopped a few inches away from his chest. Murong Mingyan closed her eyes and fell to the ground. The shadow guard standing beside Su Qingchen had a calm expression. He respectfully reported, "She's not dead." Su Qingchen lowered his head and glanced at Murong Mingyan, who had fainted on the ground. He nodded. The people beside him went forward and dragged her to the side. Ling Luiyue and Lei Tingfeng's martial arts weren't bad, but they were far from being a match for Ren Qining, who had won first place in the martial arts tournament. After a while, Lei Tingfeng was the first to be kicked out. Without Lei Tingfeng, Ling Luiyue naturally couldn't do anything by herself. Originally, she wasn't good at swordsmanship. Instead, she was good at qinggong and hidden weapons. After a few rounds, she was forced to the point where she couldn't use her skills. Sickly Scholar stood on the side and watched the two people fight. He hated himself for being unable to do anything because his martial arts weren't good enough. At that moment, Ling Luiyue and Ren Qining were too close. He couldn't even use poison to help Ling Luiyue. The Yanwang Chamber specialty was assassination. Chapter 553. Murong Xiong was shocked and angry. Although he had never seen Mo Xiuyao before, he knew that Prince Ding had a head of white hair. Moreover, there were only a handful of people in the world who could block his full-strength attack. Other than Prince Ding, Mo Xiuyao could not possibly be this white-haired man. Genom of Gojoseon looked at the white-clothed man standing in front of him with a complicated expression. However, he had to admit that Mo Xiuyao's sudden appearance made him secretly relieved. He turned to look at Su Qingchen and said, "Young Master Qingchen, you have a good plan." To be able to arrive so coincidentally, Mo Xiuyao definitely did not just arrive in an city. However, he did not appear in front of everyone. Clearly, he was a hidden card left behind by Su Qingchen. No wonder Su Qingchen dared to provoke the #1 expert in the world despite his lack of strength. Su Qingchen smiled faintly and did not reply. Genom of Gojoseon saw this and turned to Mo Xiuyao. "Prince Ding is quite timely. Wouldn't it have been better if he had arrived a little later and caused both sides to suffer?" Mo Xiuyao said indifferently, "Just now, there were over 100 experts coming this way. It took some time and we were almost late. I'm very sorry." Only then did everyone notice that Mo Xiuyao's white clothes were stained with blood. The blood had not turned black yet. It was obvious that it had been stained not long ago. Rin Qining, who was still fighting with 4 Qilin guards, heard Mo Xiuyao's words and her expression changed. Her arm was almost cut off. "It's good that you're here." Ling Taihan stood up and said. Su Qingchen frowned. Many people came. He knew that Rin Qining must have other plans. That was why he asked Mo Xiuyao to cut off the road to the Murong family. A few hundred guards were still manageable. However, for Mo Xiuyao to call them experts, they must not be simple. Mo Xiuyao smiled and said, "Don't worry. Li Li and Mo Jingli are handling it. I came over first to take a look. Young Master Ren, why don't you stop?" Ren Qining frowned and flew out of the battle circle. Just now, he knew that although these people looked ordinary, they were very difficult to deal with. If he had Murong Xiong's ability to kill in one hit, he wouldn't have to worry. But if he didn't, he could only be entangled by them and slowly exhaust his internal energy until he was defeated. As soon as he retreated, the 4 Qilin did not chase after him. Instead, they all retreated to Su Qingchen's side and protected her. Rin Qining looked around and said with a bitter smile, "This one has eyes but cannot see. I have met many times and did not recognize Prince Ding and Wang Fei. This defeat is not undeserved." These words confirmed that Mo Xiuyao had indeed arrived in an city a long time ago. Mo Xiuyao smiled without any sincerity and nodded slightly. "I originally just wanted to walk around and join in the fun. I didn't expect young Master Ren to make I feel so surprised and could only stay for a few more days. Isn't today's matter a coincidence? So, if you didn't act smart and send people to follow me, I would have left long ago. So today's defeat is also because you asked for it." Ren Qining understood the meaning behind Mo Xiuyao's words and his face became even uglier. "You are Prince Ding." Murong Xiong stared at Mo Xiuyao and asked in a low voice. Mo Xiuyao raised his head and said proudly, "That is I." Murong Xiong could be considered a figure in Jianghu, but the Prince Ding mansion had never lacked geniuses. Every generation of Prince Ding was a stunning figure. How could Mo Xiuyao pay attention to someone like Murong Xiong who didn't know anything other than martial arts? Murong Xiong sneered, "What a good Prince Ding. This old man wants to see what kind of ability you have." The sword in Mo Xiuyao's hand trembled and he smiled faintly. "Why don't you try? Pavilion Master Ling, can you still move?" While they were talking, Ling Taihan and Genom of Gojoseon took the opportunity to adjust their breathing. Hearing Mo Xiuyao's words, they immediately moved their feet. The three of them formed a triangle around Murong Xiong. At this time, no one wanted to overestimate themselves and fight Murong Xiong one-on-one. Moreover, apart from Ling Taihan, the other two weren't people of Jianghu. Naturally, they couldn't be expected to follow the rules of Jianghu. Killing the opponent was the most important thing. Ren Qining suddenly intervened and stood in front of Genom of Gojoseon. He smiled and said, "The three of you, it's fine if it's 2 against 1, but 3 against 1 is unsightly. Why don't I experience a few moves from Genom of Gojoseon?" Mo Xiuyo smiled, "Young Master Ren, please do as you wish." After saying this, he didn't pay attention to the others and waved his sword. A biting cold light flashed towards Murong Xiong. Ling Taihan didn't hold back either. He waved his sword and sword chi surged. The two of them worked together much better than Genom of Gojoseon. Even Murong Xiong wasn't as relaxed as he was. On the other side, Ren Qining naturally began to fight with Genom of Gojoseon. On the road to the Murong clan, there was also a bloody and chaotic battle. One side of the battle wore the clothes of ordinary people and used all kinds of weapons. However, each of them had extraordinary skills. On the other side, Mo Jingli's bodyguards were faintly unable to stop them. Mo Jingli swung his sword and killed an enemy. He felt a strong wind coming from behind his head and hurriedly wanted to dodge, but it was too late. Just as he saw a long sword stabbing towards his chest, a white shadow flitted past. The sword that was hurriedly stabbing towards his chest paused. Mo Jingli quickly dodged, and when he turned back, he saw that the person had fallen to the ground. Chapter 554. Before she could turn around, she saw a group of people approaching. Yili couldn't help but frown. Ren Qining couldn't have hidden so many people near in city without anyone noticing. Mo Jingli glanced at them and said, "It's Imperial Brother." It was indeed Mo Jingqi and his group of highly skilled guards. Yili frowned. They didn't bring many people with them this time, so they chose to work with Mo Jingli to intercept Ren Qining's people. Of course, this was because Mo Jingli had taken advantage of many of the Murong family's businesses in Dechu State. On the other hand, although Mo Jingli wasn't a reliable person, Yili still felt that this person had a bottom line compared to the sometimes calm and sometimes crazy Mo Jingqi. She didn't expect that Mo Jingqi, who cherished his life so much, didn't leave when in city was obviously in chaos. Instead, he brought people to the Murong family. What is he doing here now? Mo Jingli laughed coldly. What else can I do? Naturally, he's here to loot a burning house. Yili smiled coldly, loot a burning house. Who can he rob? As they spoke, Mo Jingqi had already walked in with his people. When he saw Mo Jingli, his originally smiling face became gloomy and distorted when he saw Yili, Princess Ding. Why are you here? Yili smiled faintly, and city is Shiling's territory. The people of Shiling have never said that they don't want me here. Why can't I be here? Mo Jingqi's eyes were probing. Since Princess Ding is here, then Prince Ding is naturally here too. Yili smiled and said, "Does Emperor Chu want to have tea with our prince?" Mo Jingqi looked at Yili and the guards beside her. His eyes flashed and he turned to Mo Jingli and asked, "Why is Imperial Brother here?" Mo Jingli solemnly said, "I came to join in the fun and happened to run into Princess Ding." "Isn't Imperial Brother here as well?" Mo Jingqi said, "Is that so?" From his tone, it was clear that he did not believe Mo Jingli's explanation. Mo Jingli knew that Mo Jingqi was suspecting that he might be in cahoots with Mo Xiuyao. He didn't explain, nodding and saying seriously, "Yes. I have to go to the Murong family first. If Prince Li and Emperor Chu still have things to say, I will take my leave first." Yili smiled faintly. Mo Jingli said, "I also have to go to the Murong family. Let's go to Ba together." Imperial brother. Mo Jingqi said in a low voice, of course I have to go and take a look. As he said this, his gaze kept lingering on Yili. Yili didn't care and walked casually beside Mo Jingli. She didn't care about Mo Jingqi's expression and talked with Mo Jingli as they walked towards the Murong family. Mo Jingqi walked alone on the other side, his gaze sweeping over the two of them was dark and cold, causing them to tremble in fear. Yili glanced indifferently at Mo Jingqi, who was staring at her from time to time. She obviously knew what Mo Jingqi was thinking. He was thinking about whether or not he could use her to threaten Mo Xiuyao. Unfortunately, she wouldn't give him the chance. She glanced at Mo Jingli, who was only a step away from her. If Mo Jingqi wanted to make a move, Mo Jingli and his bodyguards would become her best shields. Furthermore, with Mo Jingqi's personality, he wouldn't dare to make a move before he knew which side Mo Jingli was on. When they arrived at the Murong family, the large-scale battle had already ended. In the open space in front of the Murong family's gate, only Mo Xiuyao and a few others were fighting fiercely. Powerful sword qi and palm qi flew in all directions, smashing the surrounding trees and even the eaves. It was a complete mess. Big brother. Yili walked to Su Qingchen's side and said softly. Su Qingchen glanced at Mo Jingli and Mo Jingqi who were following behind Yili, then looked at the blood that had accidentally splattered on her body. He couldn't help but sigh. After carefully sizing up Yili, he asked softly, is Li injured? Yili shook her head and said, Big brother, don't worry. Li isn't injured. How long have they been fighting? Su Qingchen muttered to himself for a moment, then frowned and said, it's been 2 hours. Yili said, Xiuyao has also met Murong Xiong before. Since he said that he and Pavilion Master Ling can deal with Murong Xiong together, there shouldn't be any problems. However, we have to prevent Genom of Gojoseon from taking advantage of the situation after the battle. Su Qingchen nodded and smiled, I also have the same thoughts. So, let Genom of Gojoseon and Ren Qining fight for a while longer. Genom of Gojoseon had already been injured when he fought with Murong Xiong before, and his injuries were even more serious than Ling Taihan's. If he fought with Ren Qining again, his vitality would be greatly damaged, and he wouldn't have the energy to do anything else. Therefore, Su Qingchen watched the battle for a long time and didn't have the slightest intention of asking Qi Lin to help Genom of Gojoseon. Mo Xiuyao still couldn't see it, but the battle between Ren Qining and Genom of Gojoseon was about to end. As Su Qingchen and Yili spoke, the two of them simultaneously sent out a palm strike with all their strength. Then, they both retreated 7 or 8 steps before stabilizing their bodies. Ren Qining's face was pale. He furrowed his brows and finally spat out a mouthful of blood. Even though Genom of Gojoseon didn't spit out blood, there was a trickle of blood at the corner of his lips, and his body swayed. Lei Tingfeng hurriedly went forward to support him. Ren Qining and Genom of Gojoseon were almost 20 years apart in age. Even though Genom of Gojoseon was injured first, it was enough for Ren Qining to be proud that the two of them were able to fight to a draw. Fuwang, how are you? Lei Tingfeng supported Genom of Gojoseon and asked with concern. Genom of Gojoseon waved his hand to indicate that he was fine. He raised his head to look at Ren Qining and said, Ren Gongzi is very skilled. Ren Qining's injuries weren't light either. He forced a smile and said, Prince overpraises me. He glanced to the side and saw Yili standing next to Su Qingchen. He grimaced helplessly and said, this one was blind and didn't recognize Prince Ding and Wang Fei. This time, I've really been busy. That was why it was said that it wasn't good to be too shallow. It wasn't good to be too mysterious. If one didn't want to be understood by others, if one hid too deeply, they would lose the opportunity to interact with others. If it was Lei Tingfeng, Mo Jingli, or Tan Jiji, if they encountered Mo Xiuyao and Yili on the road, even if they didn't recognize them on the spot, they would still be able to recognize them if they thought about it carefully. After all, the art of disguise wasn't so good that it could change a person's appearance completely. But it was a pity that Rinchining had never seen Mo Xiaoyao and Yili before. Even if he had seen pictures of them, the pictures in this era were very abstract and freehand. If they weren't wearing the same clothes, he probably wouldn't have recognized them even if he saw them face to face. If Rinchining had known that the people he encountered were Mo Xiaoyao and Yili, he definitely wouldn't have underestimated them and acted so carelessly. Yili didn't feel anything towards Rinchining's frustration. She smiled and said, "Gongzi is too polite. This consort and prince didn't think that we would meet someone like Gongzi. It's an honor to meet you. Lin Gongzi." Rinchining's eyes narrowed and he stared closely at Yili. He smiled faintly and turned his gaze towards Mo Xiaoyao and the others who were still fighting. At this time, the fight had already reached its most critical point. The spectators couldn't help but hold their breaths. Mo Xiaoyao and Ling Taihan looked at each other and stood up at the same time. One in front and one behind, they stabbed towards Murong Xiong. Murong Xiong was pincered by the two of them and was also under great pressure. Mo Xiaoyao and Ling Taihan working together was several times more difficult to deal with than Genom of Gojoseon. Both of them used swords. Ling Taihan's swordsmanship was steady and wide, with the style of a great master. Mo Xiaoyao's swordsmanship was swift and fierce. His sword moved from the side, making people unable to avoid him. Even Murong Xiong couldn't help but admit that these two people were heavenly geniuses. If they were in the same era as him, their achievements would be even greater than his. More importantly, when the two of them were fighting, when one of them attacked with all his strength, the other would take the opportunity to rest and vice versa. Murong Xiong knew that they wanted to prolong the fight to exhaust his martial arts, but he couldn't break through this situation. When the two swords stabbed towards him, Murong Xiong already felt a trace of fatigue. However, he wasn't willing to let these two arrogant juniors go. He leaned to one side and separated his palms to attack the two of them. Mo Xiaoyao and Ling Taihan clenched their teeth. Instead of retreating, they advanced and stabbed their swords towards Murong Xiong without any hesitation. Of course, Murong Xiong's two palms also landed on their bodies. The two of them were sent flying at the same time. Even their swords fell from their hands. "Xiaoyao! Big brother!" Yili and Lang Luyue exclaimed at the same time. They flew forward to support Mo Xiaoyao and Ling Taihan who had fallen. They couldn't see clearly because of the fight from afar. Now, they saw that Mo Xiaoyao was covered in sweat. Even his silver hair was wet. Ling Taihan's face was also pale. The back of his blue robe was completely dyed dark blue. The hand that was holding the sword was also trembling slightly. Yili repeatedly called out, "Xiaoyao, Xiaoyao, how are you?" Mo Xiaoyao took a breath and then smiled at Yili comfortingly, "I'm fine. My sword stabbed him first." If it wasn't for the fact that Murong Xiong had lost a lot of internal energy, the two of them would have been injured even more. At least Mo Xiaoyao still had the energy to provoke Ling Taihan, "Last time you won. This time I won." Ling Taihan helplessly smiled, "This time you won." Everyone looked at Murong Xiong who had also fallen to the ground. His injuries were much worse than Mo Xiaoyao's and Ling Taihan's. Mo Xiaoyao's sword had directly pierced through his chest. Ling Taihan's sword had also slashed across his waist. His entire upper body was dyed dark red with blood. Yili saw clearly that Mo Xiaoyao's sword had directly pierced through his heart. It was already very shocking that Murong Xiong was still breathing, but it was clear that he wouldn't be able to survive. Thinking about how if Mo Xiaoyao's sword hadn't pierced through Murong Xiong's heart, even if Murong Xiong was killed by Ling Taihan, his injuries would have been even worse. After that, even if Murong Xiong didn't have the strength to kill the two of them, killing one of them would be more than enough. Thinking of this, Yili couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. However, what Yili didn't know was that Mo Xiaoyao and Ling Taihan had been forced to take such a risk. The two of them had indeed planned to first exhaust Murong Xiong's internal energy and then kill him. However, Murong Xiong's internal energy was more profound than theirs by nearly 50 years. Murong Xiong had consumed a lot of his internal energy, but the two of them had consumed a lot more. If they couldn't kill him in one blow, who knew who would be the one to wear out who in the end? Murong Xiong couldn't stop coughing. Blood had already spilled out of his mouth. He stared unwillingly at Mo Xiaoyao and Ling Taihan and sternly said, "Good. Good Prince Ding. Good Yanwang Chambers Lord. I didn't think this old man would actually." The unparalleled expert of the past had actually died at the hands of two juniors. Before Murong Xiong could finish what he wanted to say, he died with his eyes wide open. He died with his eyes wide open. Everyone present was silent. Murong Xiong could be said to be one of the strongest martial artists in the world today. The decline of a generation of experts always made people feel a bit sad. Ren Qining, who was standing on the side, couldn't help but change his expression. He suddenly jumped towards Murong Xiong, who was hiding in the corner. Under everyone's gaze, he didn't hesitate to cut Murong Xiong's throat with his sword. Murong Xiong hadn't recovered from his uncle's death before he also lost his life. After killing Murong Xiong, Ren Qining's expression became better. He smiled at Mo Xiaoyao and Genom of Gojosian and said, "Prince Ding, Genom of Gojosian, how do the two of you plan to obtain Murong Xiong's property?" Genom of Gojosian frowned and said, "What does young master mean?" Su Qingchen sighed somewhat helplessly. "Presumably, the real gold and silver accumulated by Murong Xiong for dozens of generations is already in young master Ren's hands, right?" Murong Xiong couldn't touch the shops, trade routes, and farmland of Murong Xiong. What was left was the countless gold and silver accumulated by dozens of generations. Ren Qining smiled and said, "Young Master Qingchen is really wise. Speaking of which, this one is lucky. If it wasn't for this, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to leave in city alive today." After killing Murong Xiong, only he knew the whereabouts of these treasures. This was his protective talisman. Chapter 555. Prince Ding, Genom of Gojosian, how do the two of you plan to obtain the Murong family's property? Faced with this sudden change, everyone couldn't help but look at each other. Genom of Gojosian pushed away Lei Tingfeng's hand and coldly stared at Ren Qining. "What does young Master Ren want to do?" For the sake of the Murong family, the price and energy he spent far exceeded that of Mo Xiaoyao and Su Qingchen. Therefore, he couldn't tolerate the cooked duck flying away like this. Mo Xiaoyao was still lying on the ground, unable to get up. He leaned his head against Yili's chest and lazily looked at Ren Qining. "I already said that I only came to join in the fun, so I really did come to join in the fun. The matter of the Murong family's property, I don't have the final say." "Ah. Murong Xiong, that old fellow is very powerful. Li, your husband's injury is very serious." Seeing his pale face but smiling at her as usual, Yili's heart ached. "Is it very painful? Let's immediately go back and call a doctor." Although Mo Xiaoyao said that he was seriously injured, other than Ling Taihan, no one really thought that he was seriously injured. Looking at the person half lying on the ground, the vigilance in their eyes became even stronger. Hearing Mo Xiaoyao's words, Ren Qining raised her eyebrows and looked at Su Qingchen. She smiled and said, "Then what does young Master Qingchen say?" Su Qingchen looked down and indifferently smiled. "The Murong family doesn't belong to the Prince Ding mansion. At most, it can be considered a windfall." Don't look at the blood flowing like a river this time. In fact, other than Mo Xiaoyao receiving an unknown injury, the Prince Ding mansion didn't suffer any losses. The people who took action were either Genom of Guozhouzian, Yanwang Chamber of Commerce, or Mo Jingli's men. The Prince Ding mansion did not bring many people, so the number of sacrifices was naturally limited. Moreover, even if they didn't have anything else, at least all of the Murong family's properties in the northwest and half of the Dechu state's properties had been taken over by the Prince Ding mansion. Even if they couldn't get the remaining property, the Prince Ding mansion wouldn't suffer a loss. Hearing this, Ren Qining's face darkened. He smiled faintly and said, I remember that I have never offended young Master Qin Qin or the Prince Ding mansion. Can't we part on good terms? His biggest bargaining chip now was the Murong family's wealth, but if the Prince Ding mansion wasn't interested in this, then his chance to escape. Moreover, even if young Master Qin Qin isn't interested, I wonder if Genom of Guozhouzian, Pavilion Master Ling, Emperor Chu, and Prince Li are also not interested. Ren Qining's gaze turned to the others. He smiled and said, speaking of which, it's a coincidence that you are a little late. The Murong family is indeed a century-old family with wealth comparable to that of a country. I'm afraid that the combined wealth of the West Hill and the Dechu state's national treasuries can't compare. As expected, the others' expressions changed slightly. Ling Taihan was still fine. He held Leng Luyue and sickly scholar's hands and stood up. He glanced at Su Qingchen and said, whatever young Master Qingchen means, I mean it. Genom of Guozhouzian, what do you say? Su Qingchen asked. Genom of Guozhouzian hesitated for a moment and said, speaking of which, young Master Ren has nothing to do with the West Hill. Genom of Guozhouzian's meaning was self-evident. Mo Jingqi's gaze slowly swept past Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li. He suddenly laughed and said, Genom of Guozhouzian is right. Moreover, young Master Ren didn't do anything. If something happened in the West Hill, who would dare to come to the West Hill? Young Master Ren and I hit it off at first sight. Why don't we go back and have a drink together? Actually, the most talkative person present was Mo Jingqi. The others had more or less experienced a fierce battle. Only Mo Jingqi and the hundreds of experts around him hadn't fought. Looking at Mo Xiaoyao who was leaning against Yi Li, Mo Jingqi's eyes were filled with resentment, fear, and unwillingness. He wasn't sure how serious Mo Xiaoyao's injuries were. He also didn't dare to bet that his subordinates wouldn't be able to kill him. Therefore, he didn't dare to act rashly. If it was someone else, Mo Jingqi might have given it a try. However, the person who was injured was Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Jingqi didn't dare to do so. Back then, Mo Xiaoyao's injuries were so severe that many imperial physicians had said that he wouldn't live past a month. However, he managed to survive. Many people said that he wouldn't recover in his lifetime. However, in less than 10 years, he was standing in front of Genom of Guozhouzian again. His martial arts were even better than before. Faintly, Mo Jingqi had a strange thought in his mind, Mo Xiaoyao can't be killed. Su Qingchen sighed helplessly. He glanced at Mo Jingqi who was looking at him provocatively. The ruler of a country could provoke a strategist from Glass City and still be so arrogant. How promising. I understand the intentions of Genom of Guozhouzian and Emperor Chu. Since that's the case, young Master Ren, hand over the whereabouts of the Murong family's treasures. Before you leave Xiling, the Prince Ding mansion won't make things difficult for you. In other words, once he left Xiling, things might not be the same. He nodded and smiled, thank you for your mercy, young Master Qingchen. As long as he left Xiling, no, as long as he left in city, there would be people who would come to his aid. When that time comes, he wouldn't necessarily be afraid of the Prince Ding mansion. However, it seemed like he couldn't keep the treasures that he had obtained with great difficulty. Fortunately, he wasn't completely unprepared. Everyone present was a powerful figure. Naturally, they wouldn't go back on their word on this kind of matter. Enchanting straightforwardly handed over the address and account book of the Morong family's treasure. The gold and silver accumulated by more than 10 generations of Morong family heads was indeed astonishing. After confirming that it was indeed the Morong family's treasure, Enchanting didn't care about how they were going to divide it. He cleanly bid them farewell. After all, it wouldn't be his turn to divide it. Before Enchanting left, he took with him the last surviving descendant of the Morong family, Morong Mingyan. According to the original agreement with Genom of Gojosian, the Prince Ding mansion would get 30% of the Morong family's property, the Yenwang Chamber of Commerce would get 10%, and the rest would go to Genom of Gojosian. Mo Jingqi only got a portion that Enchanting specially gave him. Although he was jealous of Mo Xiaoyao and Genom of Gojosian, he still remembered that this was under someone else's roof, so he didn't say anything. As for Mo Jingli, he had another agreement with the Prince Ding mansion. Naturally, it had nothing to do with the Morong family's property. When Yi Li and the others returned to Qingyuan Inn, the entire inn was already empty. From the shopkeeper to the cleaning staff, everyone had disappeared. Yi Li and the others already knew that Qingyuan Inn was related to Enchanting, so they weren't too surprised. For safety's sake, they all moved to the inn that Su Qingchen was temporarily staying at. Genom of Gojosian left Lei Tingfeng to deal with the aftermath and rushed back to the Emperor of Xiling City on the same day. Mo Xiaoyao's injuries really weren't light. He was forced by Yi Li to lie on the bed to recuperate and couldn't get out of bed to move. For Mo Xiaoyao, lying on the bed to recuperate was more painful than killing him. However, Yi Li had been frightened by his injuries and ordered him to stay on the bed to rest. Therefore, Master Prince Ding became even more persistent in pestering Wang Fei to accompany him to recuperate. Master Qing Chen's face became uglier by the day as he worked outside. Reporting to Prince Wang Fei. Emperor Chu and Li Wang have come. The guard outside the door reported. Mo Xiaoyao, who was lazily lying on the bed with his head raised as Yi Li fed him fruit, frowned and said impatiently, "What have they come for?" The guard outside stilled. How could he know why those two had come to find the prince? But this didn't affect the displeasure in his prince's tone. He hurriedly asked, should this subordinate invite them back? The room was quiet for a while before Yi Li's voice came, "Invite Emperor Chu and Li Wang in."